and people had very strong opinions on the election. You know, some people had very strong opinions one way, and other people had strong opinions the other way. And I didn't have any opinions at all. I don't have really any opinions on anything. Like, you ever watch the CNN and they'll have the polls, you know, and it'll be like, what do you think about embryonic stem cell research? And then it'll be like, see, there you go. It'll be like 52% yes, 46% no, 6% I don't know. See? And that's me. I don't know. So I phone up the CNN, you know, and I go, hey, listen, is this the TV? Yeah, that question you asked about the embryonic stem cell research? I don't know.
Classic line. Welcome everyone to Redoubt. Although I only see two people. John, is that just like you and me?
I'm actually not sure what's going on right now because unless there's a glitch with YouTube, because it should be live. Let me check and see if it's if are we actually live? Is it just lying to us? I would expect a couple more people than two. No, it shows up in my YouTube homepage.
Yeah.
So I made a post about it.
Okay, we're jumping up to 5. It's good to see everyone here, everyone who is here.
Okay, maybe it's just nobody. I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. Nobody got notified. It's Christmas. The day before Christmas Eve.
Yeah. No, people will trickle in, I'm sure. All right, well, welcome everyone to Redoubt. Joining me today is just John, because Christian is feeling a little bit under the weather. Central Sans Defense is here. Christian's under the weather, so we're just going to proceed without him this week. But hopefully he has a speedy recovery and can join us again next week. John, how are you doing tonight?
Good. You know, just hanging out. Family's off doing Christmassy things with the extended family, so I'm kind of just here by myself.
Fantastic. You're going to be there all throughout the Christmas season?
Yeah, we won't be back until next year. So I'll be with my family here, and then next week we'll be at the extended family's house. We're kind of just moving around, spending some time with everybody while we're out and away. So that should be a good time.
And did you guys fly or road trip?
Oh no, no, we definitely flew. We road tripped to Minneapolis to fly out of Minneapolis, but no, it's a 22-hour drive. So that's about a week. That's about a week of driving there.
Some families can do it. Some families.
Yeah, I mean, it's not terrible. I've done it before, but
it's probably not worth it.
I don't know.
If you don't enjoy that kind of thing, that's quite a bit. All right. Well, today we are going to go over the Mormon Jacob Hansen and Joe Heschmeyer debate on the Great Apostasy, or is it? A little unclear. The terms could have been better defined at the beginning of this debate. But for those of you who missed it, I'll go ahead and share my screen. There was a debate with Joe and Jacob on the topic of the Great Apostasy, which is something that Mormons claim. But it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly that there's some word concept fallacies going on, and they're really talking past each other. Also, some audio shenanigans. Did you catch that, John, where Joe's audio was not recorded, and the Mormons are the one who arranged all the audio, so I thought that was a funny little bit of sabotage.
Yeah, sure.
Convenient.
Sure, all right.
Yeah, have you seen this yet, John?
I watched the first little bit of the opening, and that's it. So I have not seen this yet.
Fantastic.
I am familiar with a lot of the arguments, so.
Yeah. I was not as familiar with sort of the Great Apostasy. I mean, I'd heard the term, but I couldn't have told you how kind of Mormons argue for it. So it was interesting. I learned something watching the debate, but it also reminded me how unproductive these sorts of debates can be. when they're not really trying to get to truth, they're trying to win, which is the whole point of a debate like this. But really, in my opinion, about halfway through, they should have just stopped the debate and said, "Oh, actually, it was a big misunderstanding. We're misagreeing on actually what the terms are and what the debate was about." But you can't do that in a live debate. Obviously, you got to give the people something. So, it's kind of well, we'll talk about it a little bit later because I have some thoughts on kind of where this all goes wrong. But yeah, I think we can jump into their opening statements. We've covered both of these people on this channel before. Both Joe, who is Shameless Popery, is his channel. He's a Catholic, and as his name would imply, and then Jacob Hansen, who is a somewhat philosophically inclined Mormon. He's kind of the Mormon apologist. He's pretty articulate, and he is able to articulate the Mormon position about as well as anyone. And sometimes if he's talking to a Christian who's not prepared, he can actually best them in a debate. But he's only really able to debate certain topics, and only from what I hear, just kind of the inside baseball from people that have tried to debate him or reached out and offered. He's always very particular about the topics that he debates, and it's usually stuff that's not really core to Mormonism. It's just kind of, well, stuff like what we're going to see here, where he ends up going off on the papacy, not so much the details of the Great Apostasy. So that's kind of his trick, so to speak, if it's not too unfair to call it that. Any other thoughts, John, before we jump in?
Yeah, I mean, so if you're not familiar with Mormon theology, which I imagine most people aren't, so the reason why Christians and Mormons see themselves differently, or at least Christians don't see Mormons as Christians, but Mormons see kind of us as partial Christians. It's very technical. So they believe that in the Great Apostasy there was the whore of Babylon. So they believe that the church died out almost instantaneously after the deaths of the apostles. And you have the Great Apostasy, the church becomes the whore of Babylon, as referred to, I think, in Revelations. And so they believe Orthodox Catholics and by extension Protestants as well are all part of this whore of Babylon, church of the devil type of thing. And that's why Joseph Smith had to be brought around and given a new revelation to fix the great apostasy. I think that's a fair summation.
Right. And so it kind of comes out to Mormons claiming that the Church of Mormon is the real Catholic Church. That institutionally the church fell away, and then they needed a new prophet to come around post the American Revolution and establish the true institution of the church. So basically to be the next Peter, or to pick up where Peter left off. I don't know if they quite claim that authority. I'm not sure exactly what authority they claim. If they claim something more akin to, go ahead.
So they call their leaders apostles, right? So they have a council of 12
so they
apostles.
Are saying that there's a succession.
And then the head of the church is the prophet, right? I want to say
isn't there a president as well? I get confused about their titles.
I forget if it's a prophet or a president, but yeah, their ecclesiology is a little bit different. But no, they have living apostles. They call living apostles that are, passed, not passed down directly, but from Joseph Smith afterwards. So I guess they're living apostles in spirit, descended from the original 12.
Yeah, so they are making a claim to apostolic succession, which is pretty wild. All right, let's see if the audio is working here. Can you hear that?
Yeah. So they have a president, which is a prophet, which is a seer, and then they have a quorum of the 12 apostles. So that's kind of their hierarchical leadership. And then every they don't have pastors, they're all bishops. I want to say bishop and pastor are the same thing in their ecclesiology.
Gotcha. Makes sense. I mean, essentially that's actually the same in modern day Protestant denominations, right? Elder and bishop are the same term. Yeah. Alrighty. Let's see.
Hello, hello, hello. All right, we are about to begin the debate tonight. Thank you all for coming. And a special thanks to St. John the Baptist Parish for their hospitality, Father Tilly.
We're going to jump ahead here.
Now.
All right, so we'll start with Jacob. So, yeah, the audio is funny because Jacob's audio is perfect, but Joe's audio is very messed up, and I think they had to basically pull his audio from
somebody else's
echo
mic.
from someone else's mic, exactly. And he tried to clean it up, but it's pretty rough. So,
no,
yeah, not a good look.
With deep respect for the Catholic Church in mind, we have gathered together today to engage over one of our major differences. And Joe here is here to claim that the Pope has always sat in the chair of Peter, and therefore all believers in Christ, including Protestants and Orthodox, must submit to the infallible dictates of the Pope, because he is the ultimate earthly authority for all believers in Christ. And knowingly rejecting his infallible decrees are, in Catholic dogma, a mortal sin that leads to an eternity in the fires of hell. So my Protestant friends, if Joe wins tonight and proves that the Catholic claims are true, I expect to be seeing you alongside me praying the rosary at Mass this Sunday. But is the Roman Church the one true church? Well, first we must discuss what we mean by church. The word church can be used to refer to the body of believers, or it can be used to describe the institution that governs those believers. Remember, tonight's debate is not if the church as a body of believers ever ceased to exist. The church, in the sense of a body of believers, has certainly had a continual existence since the time of Jesus Christ. And no doubt the Lord's Spirit worked amongst those believers. Let me be clear. Latter-day Saints do not teach that the church as a body of sincere believers was ever lost from the earth. But what about the institutional church? Is there an institutional church on earth today that has continually held the ultimate governing authority and jurisdiction over all the world in the same way that Peter and the other apostles did? Because if no one on earth holds that same authority, then something was lost. You see, Protestants and Catholics both get something right. Catholics are right to point out that Peter held a special universal jurisdiction and authority. And the Protestants are right to point out that that central authority did not exist after the apostolic era. So in other words, something was lost. So what is the great apostasy? I want you all to write this down. Today, when I talk about the great apostasy, I mean the demonstrable doctrinal and institutional corruption that inevitably resulted from a loss of the authority to receive ongoing, binding public revelation for the entire body of believers.
So that definition is really key. I'm going to go back a second here, and let me slow it down even. So, John, I want you to tell me if that definition is actually all that different from what Protestants would claim about the Catholic Church.
Talk about the great apostasy, I mean the demonstrable doctrinal and institutional corruption that inevitably resulted from a loss of the authority to receive ongoing, binding public revelation for the entire body of believers.
So there's a couple components there. One is he's saying the inevitable doctrinal corruption. We can come back to that, but then resulting from the loss of the authority to claim infallible judgments about dogma, and so yeah, there's those two components, which already, in my view, we're far from what most people, at least Protestants and Catholics and Orthodox, when we use the term apostasy, we're not referring to, we're referring to something different than this institutional corruption. But I don't know. So, yeah, how different is that from your view of the corruption or loss of authority within the Catholic Church, John?
Well, so I mean that's kind of complicated, I guess. When it comes to apostasy, as you kind of mentioned, like loss of authority or corruption or being incorrect about certain things isn't necessarily the same as apostasy, right? Isn't the same as turning back, as intentionally going against the word of God, as intentionally defying the authority of the church or whatever that might be, right? So as far as that kind of like dodges the title of the debate a little bit, because like, and that's the thing too. It's like, well, you point to corruption in a church, and you're like, oh, see, so they've lost all their authority, and I don't know if that's even correct from a Protestant perspective, because you can have corrupt organizations that still have authority or can still be used in a positive manner. And again, in Mormon dogma or in their doctrine, they call the church after the great apostasy like the whore of Babylon. So
Right.
he's almost like he's softballing his own beliefs about it and making it seem more palatable, which I feel is unfair. If that is what you actually believe, that is according to Mormon dogma, like what happened to the church post the apostles. Right.
Right. Let me play it one more time.
On corruption, I mean the demonstrable doctrinal and institutional corruption that inevitably resulted from a loss of the authority to receive ongoing, binding public revelation for the entire body of believers.
Right. Loss of authority to receive ongoing binding revelation.
Yeah,
Just
so I
writing this
mean, but
down.
even that I wouldn't agree with though.
Right. So, okay, explain.
Well, so I mean, Galatians 2, Paul rebukes Peter. Peter was incorrect. He was kind of Judaizing the faith a little bit, trying to have it both ways. He gets rebuked. There's the council at Jerusalem right after that, which James is the head of. Um, so just because he was incorrect about something, that wouldn't negate his possibility or his authority or his ability to, even after that, because Peter was still alive, to have the keys to the kingdom, to be the head of the church, right? That wouldn't invalidate any of that, and that's
Right.
even within scripture. So they would have to go back and say, well, actually we don't really like that translation of scripture, and maybe that's corrupted or something like that.
Right. Yeah, so it's like the Protestant view is that there is a slow corruption that takes place, and there is even an early ecclesiological difference that develops where that Protestants do push back on. So I mean, Protestants are willing to basically go back to what early Christians believe and say, no, you were wrong about the church, but in no way claim that there's an apostasy taking place. And so he says inevitable doctrinal and institutional corruption. I think the inevitability is perhaps is somewhat of a unique Mormon claim. I think Protestants would say that yes, there was over time a doctrinal and institutional corruption, but not that was inevitable stemming from this loss of authority. It's more that there was just a slow, collection of accretions of bad doctrine that developed. But the second part, stemming from the loss of authority to receive ongoing binding revelation, is interesting for a few reasons as well. Because one, the Catholic Church, and Jacob makes this point later, they don't really claim to receive new revelation in the same way that they did in the past. They are just passing down and protecting the apostolic deposit. And so, whereas the Mormons do claim to receive ongoing revelation, so we're already starting to kind of muddy the waters a bit. Just something to point out. But go ahead.
Catholics kind of try to have it both ways too, where they say that they don't want any sort of doctrinal advances or accretions, but then at the same time they are very much so okay with accretions and certain add-ons. Maybe not when it comes to like dogma, but they're fine with. I mean, like even the Rosary is an
Even
accretion,
dogmas,
like much
they would,
later on.
Yeah, I would say even dogmas, but they just say that they are implicitly found in the apostolic deposit, so that they allow developments in doctrine, but they have to be implicitly contained within the deposit, if not explicitly. And so these things that we see later that are not explicitly at all contained in the first century writings, and no one really even suspects that they were. They say that they were implicitly contained in that deposit and was passed down. And remember, the deposit doesn't just include what was written down; it also does include some of these oral traditions that were passed down. So it's a rather
Right. And so that's where things get more complicated, because it's harder to verify oral
it's very hard to
traditions,
verify.
or
Exactly.
it can be locale versus locale, and all sorts of fun stuff. So
Yeah. So
yeah,
so I think it's worth pointing out that this view of institutional corruption is unique to Mormonism. It is not the same as what Protestants would typically say about the Catholic Church. So that's worth noting. But also, it's not at all what anyone besides Jacob, from my knowledge, or and perhaps other Mormons. I don't know how well he speaks for Mormons in general, but no one else would really use this definition of apostasy. This is a very unique definition of apostasy to talk about institutional and doctrinal corruption. People talk about personal apostasy. People talk about, you could even talk about the apostasy of the church, but just referring to it as sort of this institutional corruption is that's not really how the term is typically understood. So, and you'll see that throughout the entire debate, Joe and Jacob never really align on this definition or any definition, as far as I can tell. So, this is why a lot of these debates can be kind of pointless, because if you can't even agree on your terms from the outset, then what are you doing? So, well, we can keep going, but that's just something to call out from the get-go.
well, and maybe another thing I'm a little confused about from the Mormon perspective as well is, if you think, okay, post death of the apostles, there's this inevitable corruption, inevitable changing of doctrine, whatever it might be. Why does that also not apply to the Mormon Church post the death of Joseph? Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not as clear on all the accretions and what's happened within the Mormon Church.
Well, I
I
I
think,
I'm just curious.
yeah, I mean, I think that you could certainly make a case there as well. All right, so there we go. That's his definition. We'll keep going.
Look, we both agree that Christ established one true visible institutional church, and that institutional church has either had a continual existence or there was an institutional apostasy. Those are the only two options.
Yeah, there you go. Those are the only two options. This is a false dichotomy. We'll see him come back to this again, but just this dichotomy does not work.
Institutional church, and that institutional church has either had a continual existence or there was an institutional apostasy. Those are the only two options.
Because as he puts it there, he is saying that Protestants are, by his definition, by at least the way he put it right there, with that dichotomy, he is saying that what Protestants view the failings of the Catholic Church, the lack of institutional continuity, that Protestants would also agree with him that there was an apostasy, but Protestants never use that terminology. Protestants do not believe in some kind of apostasy. So right there we have an issue. We just have not aligned on the terms.
Well, so it's Mormons are restorationists, right? So the church has fallen away and it has to be like rebuilt from scratch, whereas Protestants by and large are reformationists, right? Where the church is here, we just need to fix it up a little bit.
Yeah. And what you'll notice is that you can make Jacob's claims make sense. Like internally, they can work. Now there may be internal critiques to make, but worldviews are holistic, and very often you can make a worldview work within its system, and it will, when it butts heads with another worldview, there will be certain terms that are shared, but because worldviews are holistic, they're not going to actually mean the same thing in these different views. And so a word like apostasy is not going to mean the same thing in Mormonism as it will in the Trinitarian Christian sects. And it would be like a debate between a Catholic and Protestants. I mean, you've probably seen debates like this, debating justification, only to realize that they're using the word justification to mean very different things. One is using it to refer to one part of the salvific process, and the other was using it to refer to basically the whole salvific process. And that's a really important distinction that if you don't realize, you're going to be completely lost. And so two people can use a term correctly. I mean, etymologically, it can follow from its origins. But if it actually means different things, they're going to have a really hard time getting to truth in a debate. And so you have to realize that when you've got these worldviews buttoned up against each other, you can't just pick this one little topic like, was there an apostasy, and debate that, because Jacob is going to say, yes, there was. Joe is going to say, no, there wasn't. And yet they could actually align on the facts of what happened, at least in the minutia to some degree, right? Like Joe could agree to a certain amount of institutional corruption. And Jacob could then look at that and say, oh, you see, you agree that there's an apostasy. And Joe could say, well, no, I don't believe that apostasy means that. And something very similar to that happens in this debate. And so it just, worldviews come in packages, and you have to take it as a whole, and you have to understand the terms and the concepts that those terms represent within the overall package. And when it comes to Catholicism and Mormonism, they're most likely too different in order to really have a productive conversation, or at least a productive debate. You can have a productive conversation if you're willing to, concede definitions and concede points and realize that maybe you're arguing over nothing and that kind of thing. But when you've established the bounds of the debate and then proceed forward where now your goal is to win the debate on that topic that might actually be meaningless, it's not a good use of time.
So I wonder, because in Mormon soteriology, right, in their eschatology, there's only like 5 places you can end up. There's 2 different versions of the highest heaven, there's 2 lower heavens, and then there's eternal darkness. And eternal darkness is like only saved for demons and apostates. So I wonder if by the Mormon guy's own metrics, would the early church fathers be apostates? Because he's using the word apostasy. So are they
That's
apostates?
a great question.
Are you saying like Tertullian,
Dang.
Irenaeus, all of the early guys? Are you saying that they're all apostates? Because you're using the word apostasy, but are you meaning like maybe it's a different meaning for their eschatology? But it's curious. Curious minds want the answers to that.
That's right. All right.
So here's what a Roman Catholic like Joe must do to win tonight's debate. He must prove that the Catholic claims about the continual existence of the fullness of the institutional church are true. He must prove that the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, has always had universal jurisdiction over all believers. And he must show that the popes have been infallibly guided by God in such a way that no saving doctrines have been lost or added to or corrupted in any way. Good luck. On the other hand, all I have to do is show it that the history clearly demonstrates. And it demonstrates 2 things. First, that nobody, including the bishops in Rome, thought that the local bishops in Rome had ultimate infallible authority over the church in the times before Constantine. And second, that the popes have clearly over the centuries corrupted and added to the teachings and practices of the first Christians without even claiming revelation.
Right. So now he's just making Protestant points. Now he's just arguing basically in the same fashion as a Protestant would. Now, granted, from a different perspective, but his arguments against the Pope are going to sound very familiar, very similar to the points that a Protestant would make. And I just don't think that they go to show apostasy.
So the funny thing about this, though, is that the Pope agrees with Jacob here. So there's this document that came out in like 2018. It's the Chieti document,
right?
Which most Catholics say like, oh, well, that doesn't really count. And then Pope Leo just came out like a week ago and was like, no, I love the Chieti document. I love these other ecumenical interfaith documents. So he's endorsed all of the documents that say that actually, no, the church did not exercise, dominion over all of the East and West churches in the first millennium. So it is kind of funny that Pope Leo does agree with Jacob on that point, that yes, he did not have universal jurisdiction during the first millennium.
Right. Yeah, RAP papal minimalists.
Well, but
They,
Joe's going to say, no, no, actually, I don't care that the Pope
Right.
agreed with you. The Pope
Right.
is wrong about the Pope's power.
Yeah. Well, and even when it comes to the Pope's power, a lot of times what they'll have to admit is that the early popes had the power but didn't know it. Right? They had this authority, but they just didn't realize that they had this authority.
Yes.
And which is a
and when they got rebuked by the
odd
Council
claim.
of Ephesus, that was like, I don't know. It's ecumenical, but it's also not, even though it was done outside of communion with Rome, and then Rome made it in communion, like post-dated it. Like, actually, we do sign on to this.
Right.
So, yeah,
And
I mean,
history's
but
messy.
that is the hard position for Catholics, right? Because you do have to juggle these things. That it's simpler in Protestantism and Orthodoxy, right?
Yeah.
So let's start with the first point. Here's a question. Did Peter have the authority to receive new, binding, ongoing revelation for the entire world? Obviously, yes. Does the Pope today even claim to have that same kind of authority? Here's what the Catechism of the Catholic Church says. Quote, "This magisterium only teaches what has been handed to it. No new public revelation is to be expected." You see, Peter had the authority to receive new binding public revelation for the world, and the Pope doesn't even claim to have that kind of authority. In other words, something was lost. And here's what's wild. Joe agrees. In a recent convo with Gavin Ortlund, here's what Joe said. He said, quote, "Bishops did not have the same role as the apostles. When we say Peter was the Bishop of Rome, we don't mean he was the Bishop of Rome in the same way all subsequent bishops were. Things were more murky because of the presence of the apostles who had this once in the history of the church authority." My jaw dropped when I heard Joe say that. He literally said that Peter had a type of authority that the bishops of Rome did not have. So what does this mean? It means something was lost. And that's no small matter.
Right. But still not apostasy. We're not there.
The nature and character of the church established by Christ in the New Testament.
Go ahead.
Does Joe actually believe that, though? That the bishop after Peter did not have the same authority of Peter? Because, I mean, that was kind of the whole point of transferring their authority to the next in line, right?
I'd have to go back and look at the exact quote that he said. I mean,
said
I would
the
think they still could give
apostles
Peter
were
a certain...
special.
Exactly, right? I mean,
Yeah.
going back to that apostolic deposit, right? In terms of new revelation, they're not going to have the same kind of power or God isn't going to use them institutionally in the same way that he used the apostles.
But they would still have the same authority, but just the time of revelation is over, right?
Yeah, I would think so. Well, let's see. Let's see what Jacob said. Go back for a second.
In the history of the church authority. My was the Bishop of Rome in the same way all subsequent bishops were. Things were more murky because of the presence of the apostles who had this once in the history of the church authority.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting distinction. I don't know. You would think that in a sense a Catholic would say, because of the apostolic succession, that the type of authority is the same as it's passed down. But maybe it's a question of degree. I don't know. It's a good question.
Well, because you can give somebody special roles or honorific roles or whatnot, but I would imagine that Peter's successor would have to have the same authority as Peter when it comes to authority. Because, I mean, there's delineations even within Mormonism, though, right? So, I mean, Joseph Smith would have had a special revelation, a special power compared to his progeny as well, right?
Mhm.
Surely even Jacob would say that. So is that also a apostasy because they don't have the same authority as Joseph Smith? Or the same type of revelation as Joseph Smith?
Right. Yeah, well, these are all the kinds of questions that you would be able to ask if you were just having a conversation. And maybe they get to it in the cross-ex. I haven't actually watched the cross-ex for this, so let's we might jump ahead to that because that actually could be pretty interesting. All right.
My jaw dropped when I heard Joe say that. He literally said that Peter had a type of authority that the bishops of Rome did not have. So what does this mean? It means something was lost.
All right. So let's jump ahead past the rest of the opening. Let's go to Joe. Jacob continues in this vein, never really making a point, just going after the papacy. So that's his opening argument. That's the bulk of his argument is against the authority of the Catholic Church. Now, he might actually justify why. I'm trying to think, has he already done it? There's one point where he tries to kind of justify why he thinks that is the central argument that he has to make. Let me see if I can find that real quick.
And that's no small matter. The nature and character of the church established by Christ in the New Testament was to be led by a living central authority guided by revelation. Having a prophet leading the people of God through revelation is the biblical ecclesiastical pattern found in both the Old and the New Testaments. Amos 3:7 says, "Surely the Lord God will do nothing, but he revealeth his secret unto his servants, the prophets." It is simply a matter of historical fact that there was no clear centralized leader with universal jurisdiction in the early Christian movement after the apostles. What you had was local authorities, but no central universal authority that acted as the ultimate adjudicator. In other words, you no longer had the church, you had the churches in an institutional sense. And in those churches, local authorities, the bishops, had no one higher than themselves to adjudicate final decisions. All of us have to ask, what model better fits the historical data? Joe's model, that says that the bishop in Rome held universal jurisdiction and was the ultimate infallible adjudicator for all believers? Or the model that essentially all historians see, which is that while the local bishop of Rome was, and he was, a very prominent bishop, he was not the ultimate infallible adjudicator for all believers. Now, I claim a model that is essentially what all historians see, including honest Catholics, which is that while the local bishop in Rome was a very prominent bishop, he never claimed universal jurisdiction in the early church because he and everyone else knew that he had only local authority. Now, for example, why does no one until long after Constantine actually come out and just say that the Roman bishop is the ultimate authority anywhere except for Rome? Why did the Roman bishop Victor I fail when he tried to excommunicate people outside of his jurisdiction? Is that what happens when someone is seen by all as the ultimate authority?
All right, well,
I mean, he's making the Protestant and Orthodox arguments. I'm sitting here like,
exactly.
Yep, all right.
We've all heard 100%. This. Yeah,
I got you. Yeah.
All right, let's see if he has anything at the very end, and then we'll go to Joe's.
As a Catholic, Joe claims there was no institutional apostasy because the papal institution is the original church. It is the bride of Christ, and without the papacy, the bride of Christ is dead. But does history support papal claims to infallibility, universal jurisdiction, or the perfect preservation of apostolic doctrine? It doesn't. So Joe will simply presuppose the church mentioned in the Bible must be the papal institution known as the Catholic Church, and he will avoid the history that refutes those claims. With that, I yield my time.
Wow, a minute early. Great job, Jacob. All right, let's move to Joe. And just to let you guys know, as Joe goes up here, this is not his rebuttal. Okay, this is his opening statement. So don't be prepared for him to respond to everything that Jacob just said.
Water bottle stealing the show.
Joe, when you begin, I'll start the timer.
You could be forgiven for being confused about what debate pertains to. It thought you came to debate about the papacy. But in fact, this was supposed to be a debate about the great apostasy. And as you know, there are huge swaths of the Christian world who reject the Mormon doctrine of the great apostasy without believing in papal claims. So that's their first time that we're going to have to redirect and actually get a little bit back on topic. So what is the great apostasy? Well, the Greek word apostasia means falling away, or literally standing apart. And both Catholics and Mormons and Protestants and Orthodox, we agree that there is such a thing as personal apostasy. You've got some Protestants who believe in once they know, we're leaving out of this today. But it's this idea that you can lose your faith, you can fall away from the true church. That's not what we're debating tonight, we agree on. What we're debating tonight is whether the church itself, founded by Jesus Christ, the visible institutional church that he and I both agree is founded by Christ in the New Testament, whether that fell into a universal apostasy, that the whole church is gone. Institutionally gone. And this belief is integral to the claims of Mormonism in particular. Jacob is going to call.
Real quick, so when it comes to apostasy, so the way that I've always been taught and told about, I don't actually know the official like church definition or Webster Merriam definition, but it's always to me preaching something or believing something contrary or against the Bible. That's apostasy. So you, or with a background, being a Christian, being in the church, falling away, and then explicitly going against it or something to the contrary. That's like the wide definition that I've always used.
Yeah, well, let's see. What does Webster's dictionary say? The act of refusing to continue to follow, obey, or recognize a religious faith. Abandonment of a previous loyalty. Yeah, it certainly doesn't seem to have the institutional connotation. Perhaps that's I mean, I guess you could apply it to the institution. But even this claim that Joe's making here, he says that that Mormons believe in the complete institutional collapse or apostasy of the church, isn't quite right, because Jacob is saying that local churches didn't apostize, if that's the right word. I think he's saying that there were small institutions. There was just no one universal binding institution, which I believe they would now say the Mormon institution is, right? So even there, they're kind of talking past each other, because I don't think Jacob is claiming what Joe says Jacob is claiming here. Let's go back just a second here.
To a universal apostasy, that the whole church is gone, institutionally gone. And this belief is integral to the claims of Mormonism.
Yeah, only in the sense of one institution that can make universal binding, that has universal binding authority. He's not saying that the whole church is gone, in the sense that all believers are gone, certainly, and even that all institutions are gone. He's just saying that there was no
because
universal.
they have to say that. They have to say it
Who
because
has
they
to
have
say
to agree with the Mormons have to say that it couldn't be complete and total, even if in Nephi they claim that the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon, right. Because then they would have to say that, oh well, Jesus was wrong when he said the church or the gates of hell will not prevail against you, right?
Right.
Because if it did totally fail, then that's the contradiction there. So they say, well, it mostly failed, but there were still some believers that held out in different places and whatnot and maintained the true faith, so to speak.
Right. Well, and this, the visible versus invisible church, or the personal versus institutional church, is a distinction that has a long history as well, to some degree, even within Catholicism, but certainly within, Protestants picked up those terms and used those to describe what they're talking about, and to shape their, novel at the time of the Reformation, ecclesiology, where they were saying that the church universal does not have to have a central earthly authority. They're just rejecting that altogether. Whereas Mormons do not reject that claim. They just think that there was, they still think that there is or should be a universal church, institutional church, but they just think that there wasn't for an extended period of time. But that ultimately the Church Catholic, they actually define it very similarly to the Catholics. It's confusing.
So, yeah, well, the Mormon timeline is also different, because if you get into the weirdest stuff, where one of the lost tribes of Israel navigates to the New World, and then they have this whole shindig with the Native Americans and the other things that goes on. So technically, all of that was happening at the same time the Catholics were doing their thing. So there was still like the quote unquote true church just in America with the Native Americans until they got wiped out. And then Joseph Smith finds the tablets, so on and so forth. So the timeline is a little bit different with Mormons.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
because you could even say that the Catholic Church completely fell away, because you still have the quote unquote church over here, this completely other place, allegedly doing things with a lack of evidence. But
yeah, Reformed Renegade asking who agreed to the apostasy framing of the debate. Yeah, I don't know whose idea that was specifically. I know Hansen is pretty particular about what topics he will debate. He seems to only debate things that he thinks that he can win and has strong ground on, or can kind of pull something like this where he's not really talking about the Mormon line, but arguing just the basic Protestant Orthodox attack on
to me, it's like he just watched a couple Jay Dyer. He just watched a couple Jay Dyer versus Tim Gordon debates and was like, "All right, perfect. Papacy. Yeah. That's what we're talking about today." Like, no, apostasy, not papacy. Yeah.
Yeah. They sound very similar.
Apostasy.
Jacob is going to call this a dust, but it absolutely is not. One of the biggest reasons people believe in a great apostasy, if you're coming from an LDS background, because Joseph Smith teaches it, not because history reveals it. Preaching My Gospel, the LDS Church's Handbook for Missionaries puts it like this: a universal apostasy occurred following the death of Jesus Christ and his apostles. If there had been no apostasy, there would have been no need of a restoration. We agree on that. If the great apostasy didn't happen, Mormonism is false. On the flip side, the great apostasy did happen, Catholicism is false. So neither of us are going to prove our respective religious tradition tonight, but we are going to try to disprove one another. I hope that makes sense. So if the Catholic side wins, Mormonism false, and the Mormon side wins, Catholicism false. It's not actually my job as a negative in this to prove that the Roman Church is a one-church church and people are fallible. None of that's here. It's the debate about whether or not the great apostasy happened, and that's what I'm going to debate. Jacob, I'd like to debate that as well. So let's get into the particular Mormon iterations of the great apostasy. Right? There are a couple of versions of it. So Joseph Smith in 1832 wrote his autobiography, and in it, he said that between the ages of 12 and 15, he realized from searching the scriptures that the various churches on earth had all apostatized from the true living faith, and there was no society or denomination that was built upon the gospel of Jesus Christ as recorded in the New Testament. That's it, right? That's what he means. And notice, this happens between 12 to 15, and it's not from any special revelation. He went to derive his conclusion from searching the scriptures. Then at age 16, he says, he's praying again, the Lord opened the heavens upon him, and he saw the Lord. A few years later, he gives a dramatically different version of this. It's hard to actually square with his original one. In the version that's part of Mormon canon in the Pearl of Great Price, it's no longer from searching the scriptures that he comes to believe in the great apostasy. Quite the contrary. Now he's 16, and now he has to see the Lord. He sees two personages, Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. And then he asked him, I quote, which of all the sects were right? For at this time it had never entered into my heart that all were wrong. So here at 16, he doesn't believe in the great apostasy until Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ tell him, join none of them. For they were all wrong. And the personage who addressed me said that all their creeds were an abomination in his sight. That those professors were all corrupt. That's what we're debating. Not, do you think the Pope had universal jurisdiction? The question is, are all of the creeds of pre-Mormon Christianity abominations? And the church set up by Jesus Christ wiped off the face of the earth. So whichever version of the Joseph Smith story you choose to accept or join your inclined towards, the conclusion would be the same. Christian churches are all false, and professing Christians are all corrupt, and he even says the hearts of all the Christians are far from God. Perhaps then, I would suggest that it's not surprising that this belief system is one of the reasons many Christians don't regard Mormonism as part of Christianity. As BYU's Harold Gibbons says, Mormons insist on the need for a gospel restoration, but then feel the sting of being excluded from the fold of Christendom. They have just dismissed as irredeemably apostate. Like if you regard all the Christians on earth as apostates, don't be shocked if they don't say, come join our club. So whatever else it means, the general apostasy certainly means that after death, the apostles' priesthood authority, including the keys to direct and receive revelation of the church, is taken from the earth. Now here, the story again seems a bit confusing. Some LDS official publications will claim that men corrupted the principles of the gospel and made unauthorized changes to church organization and priesthood ordinances. And that it was because of this widespread apostasy that the Lord withdrew the authority of the priesthood from the earth. So in that version, you have corruption that leads to apostasy that leads to Jesus withdrawing the authority. That's version 1. Version 2, also from official LDS materials, says that priesthood authority was taken from the earth. Because the church was no longer led by priesthood authority, error crept into church teachings. So the second version of the LDS great apostasy claim is that no, the doctrinal corruption doesn't lead to the removal of the authority. The removal of the authority is what leads to the doctrinal corruption. I don't know which version of this Jacob is going to defend tonight because he largely didn't talk about it at all. But either way, the story's getting murky, but that's what I want to interrogate today. Are those claims true? Because Mormon missionaries were sent into the field to really stress this story, a story we know to be false. As a quote, as a diamond displayed on black velvet appears more brilliant, so the restoration stands in striking contrast to the dark background of the great apostles. So that's the story. It's intentionally a black and white story. That's from Preach My Gospel. So I want to interrogate those claims. Those are stark claims, and hopefully we understand what's on them. Let's explore, beginning with first what the Bible has to say. Remember the claim is that individuals are going to go into apostasy. It's not even that a lot of people are going to go into apostasy. It's not that there are never going to be heresies. Mormons and Catholics would both admit that we have faced heresies and false beliefs within our own folks. That's not the standard. The standard, what he's trying to prove here, is that there was a universal apostasy, and that it happened quickly following the death of the apostles. Talmage, quoted on the church's website, in Doctrines of the Gospel, claims that it happened almost immediately, perhaps before the year 100. Now, what do you think about it? Imagine for a minute this is right. Imagine that Jesus Christ in the first century sets up a...
What is funny about that is how fast it happens. Like just immediately the apostles die, and then everybody's running around with like chickens with their heads cut off, I guess. So Polycarp and Irenaeus and all this other, right after apostles of John, or disciples of John, I should say, immediately fell away. I feel like that's a tall order to say. Now, you can say that there's corruption and all sorts of silly beliefs going on and people fighting. I mean, you have the Arian crisis in the 3rd century and all this other fun stuff going down. So there were definitely doctrinal issues being fought about, but a lot of this stuff wasn't like settled at this time. And so there's this political angle to everything because we have some persecution in the first couple centuries before becoming the mainstay in the Roman Empire. It's I don't know, but to say like complete apostasy, and again, it has to be such because like such a minor apostasy almost, or a minor changing of doctrines almost, because like it's not like the entire church fell into some sort of Gnostic heresy or something like that. Like, so I'm still working through Irenaeus' Against Heresies, which is a very slow, sluggish read, and it's because the way it's written is kind of funny, but yeah, the stuff that these people believed was just wild,
Right.
wacky. Okay, so it's like if the church had fallen into something like that, like right away, you would have a really good argument. But they're like, oh, what's the big Mormon difference in doctrine? Like the Trinity and Christology, for the most part. That's the stuff that
Right.
they really disagree with.
What is kind
Yeah.
of funny is that the bigger threat, at least in the Western Church, was Arianism, which is a lot closer to actual Mormon doctrine
Mormonism.
now. So it's like, in
That's
a
actually a
sense,
good
he's
point.
almost right.
Maybe they were more Mormon in the third
Yeah.
century. That's funny.
Exactly. Yeah, Jacob makes an interesting point about how he feels like he says this later, the Gospels were the good news, and then the letters, the epistles, are kind of the bad news, where it's like the apostles are then chastising the different churches for so quickly falling away. So he's like, here, we already see evidence of this great apostasy beginning. I was like, oh, that's an interesting point. I never thought about it quite like that. It still doesn't justify the tallness of that claim, but yeah, I think that's kind of how he gets around it. But I like the point you made earlier about if this is the nature of things, if this is how quickly people can fall away after the death and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, how does that same process not apply today, right after Joseph Smith? What is to keep to preserve the Mormon institution and keep that from having a similar type of corruption? And
Listen, Joseph Smith made a way better church. Okay, Christ, he tried.
right.
He tried,
You
but
know.
not quite as good. Joseph Smith just made a way better church. All right?
That's basically what you have to claim. Yeah, that's basically what you have to claim. Joe's next points, they're. I don't think that he really gets to the meat of Jacob's argument. He's trying to prop up the Catholic Church and sort of the historicity of the Catholic Church and the fact that he'll talk about the gates of hell and whatnot, and nothing really nothing novel, just kind of what you would expect, basic claims. And Jacob immediately turns around in his rebuttal and says that they're all straw men. So I'm going to actually go ahead and skip to Jacob's rebuttal, because then you'll get both Joe's claims and Jacob's response to that, and we can get it all at once.
All right.
And the audio is better.
All right, well, I have to give Joe credit. He did an excellent job of tearing down things that Latter-day Saints don't believe. The idea here is, I think Joe made a little error here in thinking he understood what we mean when we talk about the great apostasy. The idea that we believe that every Christian was totally corrupt and that any Christian belief in the Spirit of God working on the world ceased to exist at some point, that's not what we believe, guys. Literally, I have here a quote from Joseph Smith. After he read about the Christian martyrs of history, he said, quote, "I have seen those martyrs," he's talking about a vision. "They were honest, devoted followers of Christ according to the light they possessed. They will be saved." Does that sound like somebody who thinks that all Christians in the past were corrupt and evil and that the believers, the body of believers, was gone from history? Of course not.
Well,
You guys,
actually,
in our
can you
Book
also
of
pause it real
Mormon,
fast?
it talks about...
Yeah.
Something I do want to say that is an argument that I've seen. So I think it might have been even Jim Bob brought up this argument to, not to Jacob, but to the other guy who does Mormon apologetics, because there's really only two big ones that do it.
There's another guy?
But there is another guy. Yeah, he's been on Andrew Wilson. He's debated Jim Bob and a few of these other big guys as well. Doesn't usually go very well for him. He doesn't seem to be quite as professional as Jacob does, because Jacob is good at this sort of thing, even if he is very selective on the topics that he will actually engage with. But the argument is basically, do you believe the Bible is correct? Yes. Mormons believe in the 66 book Protestant canon. and then you just say, okay, well, how does the Whore of Babylon create the Bible that you believe and read right now?
Because
Right? 'Cause
Protestants
that
have an
wasn't
answer for this, Mormons don't. Same with Jehovah's Witness. I've tried to run this argument on Jehovah's Witness before. Didn't get very far. But this is mainly for lack of time. We didn't really have enough time to flesh out the entire argument. I think it would ultimately work. But yeah, Protestants can point to the history, and I know there's people talk about the canon dilemma and whatnot, but in the end, that is rather easy to get around if you just simply understand the history and what Protestants are really claiming as sort of an Occam's razor approach to what we can rely on as certain truth. But
have a
Mormons
party going on
don't
in the
really
background?
have. Apparently, someone just drove by with loud music going on. It's all right. They stopped.
I was getting into it. It's good.
Yeah, I know. It's good stuff. But yeah, but Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses don't have an explanation, and yet they adopt specifically the Protestant canon, which is also very particular because now you're clearly you have to engage with the history if you're going to accept only the Protestant canon. You're not even going back and like picking your own canon from the first century. That would be a little bit more justifiable. You just say, oh well, the Catholic Church got it wrong.
Right. Well,
but not only
you
are
would
you
think you would have to re-examine the canon.
Right, just re-examine it. But when you just take the Protestant canon, which is already assuming a certain amount of legitimacy of the process that got the Catholic canon to where it was, you have to assume that as being valid in order to then go farther down the road and accept the Protestant canon. So it really doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and that's the Protestants. There is a bit of a canon dilemma, I guess you could say, but nobody disagrees with any of the 66 books. There's the most widely quoted, the most widely believed in. So for me, like, I may not have existential certainty of the 88 books, but I can be, like 99.9% sure of the 66 books. Right.
Because
so
everyone agrees on those.
Well, right, but whether like the Catholics are actually right about 77, or the Orthodox on 79, or the Orient, or the Ethiopian on 88, right? I think all of those things should be examined, and I don't think you have to be as narrow as the Protestant 66. Like you can still be a Protestant and view other books as scriptural, but maybe you just don't have so if you're a Presbyterian, right? Those books don't necessarily hold the same authority to you as a Presbyterian as the 66 books of the Protestant canon, but you can still use them for instruction, teaching, reading, and all the other sort of stuff.
Well, you're right, and this is where the concept of inspiration, or at least reliable inspiration, is really a toggle on-off switch, right? There is a sense in which all good things are inspired, right? C.S. Lewis makes this point in a somewhat controversial letter on inerrancy, which at some point we still need to get to, but when it comes to reliable, authoritative inspiration, it's really an on-off switch. You can't have something that may be inspired that you're going to rely on as being infallibly true. That just doesn't work. It's either you got to be certain in it or not. So that's I think the rub, and that's why Protestants arrive at our canon, whereas Catholics can be certain in their own way because their canon is derived from the authority of the church, and that's what they put their first principle faith in, whereas Protestants don't have that first principle. Protestants actually have to move the first principle to Scripture, and so then we have to trim away the ones that are
right. Well, you have to be the most
certain.
Restrictive at that point.
Exactly.
Right.
If that's your first principle, then you have to be the most restrictive. Whereas Catholics don't have to be as restrictive because they have a more fundamental first principle authority that can then allow them that gives them justification for things that otherwise would be more ambiguous.
Mm-hmm. Well, but even as a Protestant, you can still read like 1st, 2nd, 4th Maccabees, because I think there's 4 Maccabees, because they're mostly historical. And what's weird about the Maccabees is I think the Catholic Church only accepts the first 2, as infallible, and then the Orthodox Church does all four, which is
Yeah.
interesting. And they're more like just historical
Mhm.
tales, basically, right?
Yeah, I've never read the Book of Maccabees or any of them. Have you?
No, I just know that they're historical about the Jewish Revolution
Right,
and
like
some of the
Hanukkah
other
comes from
infighting
that.
leading up. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be a pretty interesting story and rather significant, even in terms of Catholic doctrine, because they get a lot of the purgatory doctrine. There's at least
Is that
one or
from
two verses.
Maccabees?
I believe it's in
I thought
Maccabees
that was
where
from
they pray
Judith
for
or
the dead or
Tobit, but
something
yeah.
like that. Well, it may also be there,
Mm.
but so it's significant. I've never just taken the time to read them, but I should. And back in the day, you would have. They were included in the original King James Bible, as the Apocrypha, but they were considered to be pious reading and profitable. I mean, same with Shepherd of Hermas, which was never canonized. I don't know that any traditions have canonized it. Certainly not Catholics. I don't know where Orthodox or Orientals stand on. If you got 88,
Orthodox do not
surely
even have a settled
someone.
canon.
Well, there
Orthodox do not even have a settled canon. So
Yeah.
I think in the Orthodox Study Bible, there's 79 books, I think, in the Orthodox Study Bible.
you go. Do you
But
know
they do
if
not have
Shepherd
a
of Hermas
settled
is
canon.
one of those?
I do not know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a Google search away.
Yeah, sure. Well, anyways, part of the extended canon would seem to include the Shepherd of Hermas, but it's not in any of the official lists, right? It's not in the Catholic one, and it's not in the Protestant. And yet it was for a very long time. I mean, the early church, they considered it scripture. Some of them did, and for a long time it was considered good pious reading, and still to this day, Catholics will read it and find value in it. So it is. But what may be profitable, that's a very different standard from inspired. What'd you find out?
Well, I just it doesn't say that. I just wanted a list of somebody who used it as canonical. Yes, I mean there's different popes that have quoted it. Pope, I've never heard of this pope actually. Calixtus the First
Calixtus.
had quoted it as an authority, but not as a book of the Bible. But he did quote it as an authoritative source for some sort of dogmatic letter, or at least letter of teaching, encyclical. Yeah, I don't see anyone that has it actually as a canon list.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah, no, but I need to actually go through and read all of them as well.
Yeah, that'd be good. All right, so moving on.
The Catholic Christopher Columbus being worked on by the Holy Spirit to help God fulfill his purposes. One of the earliest press releases from the church said the following: God is using more than one people for the accomplishment of his great work. He's using the Catholic, the Protestant, and the Jew.
I do love it that the Catholic Church has encyclicals and decrees, and the Mormons have press releases. I'm sure there's degrees
Modern era.
of formality, but it's just so funny. Someone referring to a press release as being like something official.
Well, one
Truth is scattered
of
abroad
them has more historical context.
Yeah, you're right.
among all churches. It's just a misunderstanding here. But I want to do something for a minute. I would like to just assume that Mormonism isn't true, that all the things that Joe said is right, all their interpretations of Daniel and all that, that's all wrong. Okay, cool. So what church is the true church, Joe? He says he doesn't have to validate the papacy. But so how can we even tell if there was a great apostasy? The way you tell is that the original church isn't around anymore. If the original church isn't around on an institutional level, then there was an institutional apostasy. How do you disprove that? How do you show that there was no institution?
So this is interesting, because this is where I was struggling a little bit at the beginning to try to parse out and figure out exactly what the claims were and how it would agree or differ from the basic Protestant claims. I think this is where Protestants would say there's no great apostasy because the early churches, at least the version of the early church that is now and that has developed into the Catholic ecclesiology, that they were simply wrong. That, perhaps the earliest church understood it correctly. I think that we can assume that. But even, it's possible that first, second generation Christians didn't fully understand the proper doctrine of the church. Certainly, in my view, that's an acceptable thing to assume about the early church. But certainly Protestants would say that this Catholic concept of an earthly, centralized, universally binding authority is a false ecclesiology. Whereas Mormons would say, no, that's a true ecclesiology. It just didn't. It maybe was there at the beginning under Peter, and then disappeared, and then reappeared in the 1800s, right?
1800s,
yeah. So that is the big difference here. I think that helps put a finer point on what really is being where the distinction lies, because the Protestants would never make that claim about the form of the church at the very, very beginning, and so we don't have to make a claim that it fell away.
Right, that Mormons and Catholics were in the same boat when it comes to universal authority.
Yeah,
and then Protestants and Orthodox are like, well, actually, no, the church was just never arranged that way. So,
right.
But it's funny.
Yeah.
Apostasy, you have to point to an institution that exists, that has existed continually, going all the way back to Peter and the apostles, that holds his same ultimate authority and jurisdiction. That's how you disprove a great apostasy. That's why I focused my arguments on the arguments made by the Catholic Church, because Joe and I actually agree. We agree that in the early church, his book, Pope Peter, by the way, you all should go buy it. Imagine me telling you all to go buy the book of the guy that I'm debating against. Go buy the book, Pope Peter. It's a great book, and it establishes that Peter did hold ultimate, centralized, universal jurisdiction over the church, over the body of believers.
Right, which is not a claim that I would agree with. I don't know where you fall on that, but I don't see that in the Bible. I know Peter is the main character in the first 12, 13 chapters of Acts, and there's kind of a transition period, and then Paul takes over.
Mm-hmm.
And then it seems like Paul is the one who's more or less running the church. It might just be because he was the kind of the head missionary that's why we have all those letters. But it certainly seems like Paul is playing a more central role in terms of chastising and leading the growing church. And Peter goes to Antioch, and then eventually goes to Rome.
To the Gentiles. Right, that's probably
right.
There's probably a metaphysical reason why we have so many of those books survived intentionally. So many of those letters survived intentionally because this is the time where the Jews have kind of fallen away into a rebellion, and then eventually we'll all be brought back together. Because that's the kind of
right. So you can see it's sort of a jurisdiction where Peter and perhaps James were the heads of the Jews, and Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles, or maybe it's not quite so segregated and neat.
I wouldn't say it's
certainly I don't see
segregated that way.
Right. But I don't see Peter as being a Catholic pope, even Peter, even in the first century. Again, that's the Protestant claim, generally speaking, although there might be some diversity there. But yeah, I don't see even that as being a necessary claim. Have you thought much about that?
Yeah, I mean, so in Acts, I think it's Acts. It's either Acts or Galatians. I may be getting that wrong, but there is a council in Jerusalem in which Peter, Paul, and James and everybody else there, gives their opinions on it, and the person who ends it is James because he happens to be the bishop of Jerusalem at the time. Right. And so he has. That's the Orthodox opinion would be that's because James has authority there because he's the bishop there, and so that's why he has the last word in that conversation. So they argued amongst themselves.
Yeah, and don't forget that Peter went to Antioch first, and then eventually went to Rome, where he probably died, although even that's a little bit questionable. But that's why Rome came to be known as, the seat of Peter. And it was actually really important to defend that claim
dual apostolic origin, Peter and Paul in Rome. It's a special in that regard as well. But Antiochian Church was originally also a Petrian see. And there's writings referring to that in the early church fathers, right? Because it was set up by Peter.
Exactly. And I mean, even I'd be curious to look more into the history, kind of the external history, the more verified, not just sort of what's been passed, what is sort of internally been communicated by the Catholic Church, but in terms of what Peter's role was in Rome. Traditionally, he died there, and that's pretty well attested to. It seems like that definitely happened, but whether or not he actually had a major leadership role in Rome, I think is more contested. And and in terms of
how
Paul,
you wouldn't just intuitively as
because
an
he was Peter.
apostle, right?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I mean,
It
Paul
depends on
was
kind of who
there.
else was there, but well, and Paul
Which one
Paul
went first,
probably
Paul
Paul
or Peter?
probably went and died in Spain. It's unclear, but like I never really heard this until probably within the last year. But there's very good reason to believe that Paul actually didn't die, that he actually won his case in Rome and eventually went off to minister to Spain. I believe it's either. I believe it's in 3rd Corinthians. Clement's letter to the Corinthians that he describes Paul as going to the far west and dying there. So he could have been wrong, or he could have been. We could misunderstand it, but it does seem like Paul may not have actually been martyred in Rome, which is interesting because I had never heard that before.
Because Eusebius says that he dies in Rome, martyred
Right.
under Nero.
Yeah.
So I mean, also there's also like famous early forgeries as well, or again, maybe not all tradition is quite infallible because some people say that he died here, but he
Right.
didn't, or yeah. And that's the thing with oral tradition is that it's a lot harder to verify versus like, writings that you can carve and date or date, with the various other methodologies to figure out, okay, no, this was actually written at this time when they say it was written, right?
Let me find that quote from about Clement on Paul in Spain, just so we have it, because I believe that they disagree. It's not just a matter of interpretation. It seems pretty clear that Clement is saying that he went to Spain. Let's see.
So Clement of Rome in 95 CE refers to Paul. 95 AD. My apologies.
Yep.
Refers to Paul as having gone to the farthest limits of the West, which some interpret as Spain. However, there is no direct evidence in the Bible to confirm that Paul traveled to Spain after his release from Rome. Some scholars suggest that Paul may have been executed in Rome, while others believe he continued his missionary work and possibly went to Spain. I mean, you
Yeah.
could have a both and though, right? Because you could be freed from Rome, travel to Spain, do your ministry
And
there,
eventually
and
go
on your
back.
way, on your way back, then get executed by Nero in Rome, right? That
Right.
could all of those things could actually be true. They're not mutually exclusive.
Possibly. I don't know. Yeah, I'd have to think about how long Nero was reigning and how long it would have taken Paul to go back and forth. Because Nero's reign wasn't that long, was it? Let's see. How long did Nero reign? I need to brush up on my Suetonius here.
14 years. So
okay.
54 to 68.
That's enough time. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Paul did a lot of travel, so a trip to Spain and then back to Rome is not out of the question at all.
Yeah. All right. If you want to brush up on your early Caesar, just Roman history in general, Suetonius's 12 Caesars is a great book. It's probably about a 14-hour audiobook, and it goes through starting with Julius and then the next 12 Caesars, including him. And it's great because it's kind of the tabloid version of events. It's topical, so keep that in mind. It goes through each Caesar in chronological order, but within the category of each Caesar's life, it goes through topically. So it'll kind of talk about their childhood and talk about their reign, but then it'll also talk, after describing their fall, then it'll jump to the new topic of their diet or their sex life, or it's like, so it kind of goes through this sort of tawdry.
He's gay.
Yeah, right.
He's gay.
Turns out they were all gay. Nero did seem to like the ladyboys. But
yeah.
Yeah, so that's where a lot of the gossip about the Caesars comes from, and it's a good read, and there's some interesting little tidbits, and you will see that book and that account referenced quite often, even in terms of some of the details around what happened the night when Julius Caesar was killed. In terms of Mark Antony giving his kind of famous speech, you see a couple different accounts of that, but yeah, it's very interesting the way you'll see it portrayed in movies. It is often kind of pulled word for word from some of these ancient texts. So it's just so cool that we have so much documentation about some of these people that were lived a very long time ago. But anyways, okay.
We don't believe that body of believers ever went anywhere, but it's clear from the history that that didn't continue. And so there was an institutional apostasy. Okay? Now, he's going to bring up this idea that, well, wait a minute. Did Christ fail? Did the bride of Christ die? Well, what if the bride of Christ is bigger than the papacy? What if the bride of Christ are those who are sincerely seeking our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ?
Protestant argument.
Also, keep in mind that our current president of the church.
What's that?
Oh, I just said, yeah, that's the Protestant argument. No. Don't call him the president. Call him the modern apostle or the modern prophet.
Said the following: God the Son told the boy prophet that all of the creeds of the churches of that day were an abomination in his sight. We affirm that this divine declaration was a condemnation of the creeds, not of the faithful seekers. And those professors, remember he's talking about those professors. Remember when he said those professors were corrupt? Do you guys know what the context of that was? Joseph had just been to a revival in his own hometown. And the professors he was dealing with were the local Protestant, specifically Calvinist pastors. And they were pretty corrupt when you actually learn the history of how they interacted with his family and stuff. He was talking about those professors. It's just contradictory to say that we believe that we do believe in a universal apostasy, but he doesn't understand what we mean by that term. What we mean is that there was a universal loss of the ultimate authority in the church that is crucial to its ongoing progress and to combat heresy, which is what the apostles were successfully able to do. He also brought up the gates of hell. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church, guys. Oh boy, it's over for me, right? We're done. Until you realize, although he did quote right, he said it was the gates of Hades. I'm actually going to read from the Catholic Confraternity Bible commentary about this verse. It says, quote, in all these passages, the Hebrew for gates of hell is the gates of Sheol, or in other words, the gates of death. Sheol, or Hades, was the name of the abode of the dead. The whole expression in this passage means the power of death. Christ is predicting that his church will be immortal. What's the purpose of a gate? It's like, oh no, the gate's going to get me. Gates don't attack you. Gates lock things in. The proper understanding is the gates of death will not prevail against the church. Can anyone think of something that Jesus did that blew open the gates of death? I can. And if you think this is me, just my crazy Mormon interpretation, here's what Jack P. Lewis, the great Harvard-trained biblical scholar, said. He says, if one wants to expound a teaching that all hell can do will never overcome the church, that's all well and good. But Matthew 16:18 should not be twisted into being considered a proof text for it. Keeping in line with the linguistic data, the gates of Hades is to be considered as a figure of speech for death, which cannot keep the Christian imprisoned. So that's what that verse means. By the way, even if it meant what he said, the whole claim of our church is that the gates of hell didn't prevail. Like, the church was restored. So, but did God fail? How could God have failed? How could he have done this? Oh no. Well, first of all, I can refute basically everything that Joe is saying about these biblical prophecies and realize it's not talking about the Catholic Church. It's talking about the body of believers. As soon as that happens, everything he's saying just doesn't work. Now, what if the bride of Christ was the kingdom of God and the body of sincere believers that has had that continual existence? Interesting, have you guys ever thought about Revelations 12? Revelations 12 is talking about the future, and this describes a woman who has to flee into the wilderness for a time because the dragon is threatening her child. Just something to think about. Also, what
is he saying that that's the Mormons fleeing to Utah?
Well, they fled to many places along the way. What was the original one? Was in Missouri, right? Because they believe the Garden of Eden is in Missouri, if I remember correctly.
Wait, what does that mean? The Garden of Eden is in Missouri?
Yeah, like the original Garden of Eden.
They think like
Adam
the actual Garden of Eden
they
wasn't
believe the physical Garden of Eden is in Missouri somewhere. Yes.
Wow.
And that's why there's some weird lore about it. Either they own the land or they know where it is, but they can't tell you where it is. But yeah, they believe it's in Missouri.
That's funny. I was not aware of that bit of lore, that bit of fan fiction there. That's funny.
Garden of Eden, Missouri. Yeah, here it is. Let's get it over. Let me see. Yeah, so according to the Book of Mormon, yeah, the Garden of Eden is in Missouri. Sorry, they call it Adam Odni Achman or something, and that's what the Native Americans, and I forget the name of their other made up race that they have in the U.S. at that time, were fighting over it. Yeah,
Edomites or something. Yeah.
Yeah, so the prophet Joseph Smith learned through Revelation, D&C Doctrines and Covenants 57, that Jackson County was the location of a Zion to be and the New Jerusalem to come. So he had this location here, and perhaps even a general church gathering, that the ancient Garden of Eden was also located in Jackson County, Missouri. So yes, it is current. It's just one of those things where it's
That's
like
a claim.
a prophet. A prophet, to be a prophet, you need to make correct claims, correct predictions. So I feel like that's a big miss, swing and a miss. Garden of Eden in, Jackson County, Missouri. So I'm pretty sure, maybe I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure you can just like walk around Jackson County, Missouri. It's not like blocked off like Area 51. And you can just like walk through it. I don't know if that's the real Garden of Eden.
Neither is the modern Garden of Eden either in the actual location, which is somewhat unknown, but most likely we're closer to the Middle East, where it's actually
pretty
described.
Sure it's right next to Agartha.
Yeah,
pretty
it's
sure.
I mean, they literally describe the rivers, which are mostly still there. Now, of course, rivers do move, rivers change, so you can't pinpoint it exactly, but and there is even, I think some of the early church fathers do debate whether or not those rivers are in fact the same as what the bodies of water that are or the rivers that were in that day being described. So the exact location is contested even in the early church, but not Missouri. Missouri never comes up in any of the early writings, I guarantee you.
Yeah, America seems really important to Joseph Smith's writings, and I'm not sure why that is.
Well,
Maybe
part of it is the religious liberty. Jacob makes this claim. He might even do it in this rebuttal here, that the religious liberty, God was basically waiting for a country with religious liberty to bring his next prophet, because otherwise they would just kill him. That's what he says. So I never really heard that, but it does seem like Mormons
no, that's a bad argument, because we did kill him. We did kill him. He very much died. We very much so killed him.
If God was waiting, he didn't wait long enough. Yeah.
Oh, that's awkward.
Yeah, it's funny. I hadn't thought about that. That's very true. All right, let's see.
He died in a shootout, so yeah, he definitely died.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump to the cross act. Do you want to hear the first bit of Joe's rebuttal?
It's terrible. Let's get to the cross examinations, because I feel like that's going to be the good spot.
Yeah.
To do that is because I could feel the tension in the room just growing and growing. Let's get some of it out. So, and this is also like historically the spiciest part of a debate, the cross exam. I want to lay a little bit of the ground rules. So the ground rules are the person who is asking the question controls the conversation. It is not rude for them to interrupt and say, hey, you're not answering the question, right? That person is in charge of their time. Jacob only has 15 minutes. Joe only has 15 minutes. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and begin.
Okay, and it's all questions, right? Like
questions.
No statements, only questions.
Yes.
Okay, want to make sure that. Okay, so, Joe, is the Orthodox Church the true church?
I would say no, but I think you could believe.
Well, that's the only question. Okay. That's the only question I had. I just wanted to see yes or no.
It's part of the true church. I would say that. It's part of the true church.
Okay. So the true church doesn't require the.
Wait. He just said the Orthodox Church is part of the true church?
Sorry, back that up 10 seconds.
Yeah, that's quite an ecumenist claim.
So, Joe, is the Orthodox Church the true church?
I would say no, but I think you could believe.
Well, that's the only question. Okay. That's the only question I had. I just wanted to see yes or no. It's
part of the true church. I would say that. It's part of the true church.
I think that the Pope would agree with him.
I guess.
Now, well, which Pope would agree with him? The current
right.
last 3 popes would agree with him.
I guess I
However,
thought. So Joe must
middle-aged
not be in the
popes and
papal
on, no.
minimalist. Joe must be more. I
Papal
don't know exactly where he
defender.
stands in terms
Pope
of
respecter.
infallibility, but he certainly would. Yeah, he probably is more in line with the Vatican II. He's not kind of a Tim Gordon character where he's basically rejects as much as he possibly can of Vatican II.
Right.
That's interesting. All right, I don't know. That's quite a claim.
I think that's an easier claim to defend, honestly, from the Catholic position.
Why?
Because otherwise you would have to be. How do I say this? So you're either a Vatican II supporter or
because
denier.
of Vatican II. Yeah.
Right. So if you accept Vatican II and the modern papal claims, right, which is definitely a lot more ecumenical than they have been in the past, you're more of like a mainstream Catholic, right? A trad cat, however, would probably say no, they're still schismatic. So while we might recognize them as apostolic, as not it's difficult as a trad cat, but you would still at the end of the day have to either call them schismatics or heretics or something else. So calling them part of the one true church puts them on your level essentially as a Catholic, right?
Yeah, but both sides have their issues, right? The trad cats have to contend with Vatican II, and the Vatican II, post-Vatican II defenders have to contend with pre-Vatican II history, right? It's like both have their challenges when it comes to trying to have and hold a coherent Catholic doctrine. Vatican II is a bit of a wrinkle.
Okay. So the true church doesn't require the papacy?
The papacy is at the head of the church. The Orthodox, by means of valid apostolic succession, are in a fractured union with the Pope. And I think they would even acknowledge.
But do you have the church if you don't have the papacy?
You have the fullness of the church in the Catholic Church. So we would say they are true churches. We would not say that of Protestant denominations.
So the church is not. So the church is the body of believers?
No.
What do you mean by the church then?
Yeah, so Ignatius talks about this in 107, that the church at the local level involves the bishop. If you don't have the trifold structure, bishop, presbyter, deacon, you don't have a true church. That's what he says to the Ephesians. So because they have valid apostolic succession, the Orthodox and also the Coptics have true churches at the local level. At the universal level, the papacy is necessary.
So to have the fullness of the church, you have to have the...
What would they say about the Anglican Church? Because you can make a pretty good case for apostolic succession in the Anglican Church until recently.
I don't think that they, right now no, they can't because they have an invalid ordination of their archbishop. But before that, I've heard Orthodox say that, okay, well, they are apostolic, like we'll give them that, but they're still not, through their doctrine, through their dogma, they're not part of the one true church, right? They've cut themselves off in that regard. So it depends how charitable you want to be, I guess, for Anglicans. If you want to say that they have they are apostolic in that way, and I think that's a big thing for them is having the apostolic succession.
Right.
So from this perspective, from Joe's perspective, it's weird because Catholics have different ways to get around this, right? Because even the Sedevacantists are apostolic, they are Catholic, but they don't have full communion with the Pope, which is the head of the universal church. So while they're true churches, they're in error. They're not fully schismatic like an Orthodox would be to a Catholic, but they're in another middle ground. It's like Orthodox is 70% Catholics, and then Sedevacantists are 85% Catholic, and then Protestants are, they don't have apostolic succession. Right. So they would be 0%.
Right.
I don't know, because it feels like I'm getting different levels of Catholicity here,
right.
And there's gradients. Like Catholicity is a spectrum,
right?
Because even if I was a Catholic and I denied the Pope and rejected just all of it outright, like a Sedevacantist, he'd say, well, you're still part of a one true church because you have apostolic succession and you have a valid bishop, right? So you have a valid church, but you're some level of 0 to 100 Catholic,
right? Catholicism is on a spectrum. There you go. Sounds kind of fake and gay, but all right.
The ultimate infallible adjudicating authority for the church to have the fullness?
Well, you have to have the Pope. You can get into questions of jurisdiction and all of that.
So if that was lost, you wouldn't have the fullness of the church?
You wouldn't, the jurisdiction or the papacy?
The universal jurisdiction that the Pope holds. If you didn't have the Pope, would you have the fullness of the church?
If you didn't have the papacy, you wouldn't have the fullness of the church from Catholic perspective.
So, you said this, quote, if the papacy isn't of apostolic origin, then we should reject the Catholic Church. Do you still hold to that view?
If the papacy isn't of apostolic origin, yeah.
Okay, so then if that were the case, could you point me to the true church?
I would go Orthodox or maybe Coptic, but probably Orthodox.
Very cool. So would you have the fullness of the church?
If I didn't believe in the papacy? Sorry, it sounds like you're posing a counterfactual where I'm not a Catholic.
Yeah. So you wouldn't have. You had said that you don't have the fullness of the church without the papacy, which to me sounds like essentially what Latter-day Saints are claiming when we claim that the fullness of the church was lost, but that there still was a body of believers. How is that different from what I'm saying?
Yeah. So we would say you wouldn't need to have like a new prophet come along and restart Jesus' church if you were Orthodox and didn't believe in the papacy. Maybe I'm misunderstanding your question, but I was saying before, you were asking if I believe in the papacy as a Catholic, and I said yes.
Yeah, but no, I'm saying, is it essential to have the fullness of the church? Because if you don't have the fullness of the church, you need something to be restored, correct?
If you don't have the fullness of the church, you should be in full communion with the church.
Okay.
But we would say there's still, like, if
But if it was missing, just real quick, if there was no pope, would we need a pope to have the fullness of the church?
Yeah, that's why we have a conclave. We had that happen recently.
I know, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about in general. If you don't have a pope, don't you need to have the fullness of the church? You need to have you don't have the fullness of the church. So if a Latter-day Saint makes the argument that there was an apostasy, meaning that there was a loss of apostolic authority, and we believe that it needed to be restored to have the fullness of the church, I don't understand how that's different from what.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like literally, like when a pope dies, we have a conclave to elect a new pope. So if you're just literally asking, but if you're saying, would the Catholic claim be true if the papacy was false? No. Is it possible for the papacy to just go away forever? No.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's answering your question.
So what would convince you that there was an institutional apostasy?
If the Pope infallibly taught something clearly erroneous.
Okay, let's just go with that. Let's just stay with that one for a moment. Are all of the dogmas of the Catholic faith apostolic in origin?
Yes.
Okay. Can you provide me with a specific quote from the apostles or anyone in the first 500 years of the church unambiguously teaching the substance of the Catholic dogma that Mary was assumed into heaven in bodily form?
You mentioned Revelation 12 before, and there are early Christians who look to that as evidence of Mary's bodily.
So, pause it for a second. I think it's very interesting that Joe basically at that point seems to give into Jacob's reasoning, where he's saying he's agreeing that it is okay to frame this debate in terms of the papacy, because he is saying if you can show that the Pope has made a flawed statement and claimed it as infallible, then there would be an institutional apostasy. So it sounds like he's aligning with Jacob's definition of apostasy there.
Can't you just go to first millennia where the Pope gets rebuked by a council or by another saint?
Exactly. I mean, that's the play that Jacob's going to run, I'm sure.
At one point, one of the Pope's attempts to excommunicate like all of the Eastern heads of the churches, and it might not be Irenaeus, but it's one of the early church fathers who says, "No, by the way, you can't do that." Writes a letter to him basically saying, "No, don't do that."
Right. Well, I'm just struggling because Joe seemed pretty emphatic that, hey, this isn't a papacy debate. But right there, he condensed it himself to saying that, no, this is a valid focal point for the debate to talk about the papacy. Now, maybe I think
anytime Catholicism gets brought up, I think the papacy is a center point because that is what they have versus the Orthodox argument, which the Orthodox
but
argument
specifically regarding apostasy, Joe said he would consider the Catholic Church to be, he would consider there to be an apostasy if you could show that the Pope had made a false, infallible statement. All right, I think let me go back.
Substitute with a specific quote from the apostles or anyone in the first 500 years of the church. Let's just stay with that one. What would convince you that there was an institutional apostasy?
If the Pope infallibly taught something clearly erroneous.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like his opening remarks about this not being a debate about the papacy seemed completely invalid at that point. Am I wrong? Like that seems to completely give into Jacob's mode of argumentation.
Well, right. But if we're talking about infallible statements, most Catholics, or at least I can't speak for all Catholics, but they would say that there's only two like true infallible statements. Although infallibility is always a strange argument because even if they're not quote unquote infallible, they're still authoritative, right?
Right.
They're still part of the magisterium, part of the ordinary teachings, like all of their encyclicals, all their writings, homilies.
Yeah,
So
well, once
to me,
once you're
it's
talking about papal infallibility, then all of the issues that come up with that debate, all the classic canards and um, all of the, I mean, the Tim Gordon versus Jay Dyer debate, you could just basically, plug in that here. That all gets on the table. I guess my point of confusion is that, Joe does a debate review with the moderator here after the fact and basically calls foul on the debate. I think because of Jacob basically making this a debate about the papacy, but here it seems like Joe is saying no. That is what this is ultimately about, or at least that is a valid attack. If you can show that the papacy is invalid, then you can show an institutional apostasy, which is the topic of the debate. So I'm
I
very
think you
curious
have
to
to
see
agree
where
with that.
Joe. What's that?
Well, I think you would as a Catholic, you would have to agree with that if you can disprove the papacy, or it's like that's the central core, or even like a magisterial error, or like if you could prove one of the ex cathedra statements to be invalid or incorrect, then that
Yeah,
would
maybe as a
that'd be a
Catholic.
system level, that would be a system level defeater within your own worldview, right?
Right. No, but I mean, but that kind of happened at the time of the Reformation, and we wouldn't consider it an apostasy. Um, but maybe you're right. Maybe from a Catholic perspective, with Catholic
From a
presuppositions,
Catholic
it
perspective, if
would be an
you
apostasy. I
prove
think you're right.
the papacy invalid from your own worldview, it would be a defeater for the entire
Then
system,
you would have to become a
right?
Protestant, and then you wouldn't have to say it's an apostasy. But if you
Well,
continue to be a
you
Catholic
there's
after
only two
showing that the
options.
Catholicism was invalid, then you would agree to that it was an apostasy. I guess it's
Well,
kind of how
and
it
that's the
works
thing.
out.
So even Joe
Yeah.
himself says, like, oh well, if we didn't have the papacy, then I would just become Orthodox, right? Because
Mm,
Orthodox doesn't have the same ecclesiology. Now, one funny
I guess that's
thing
true.
that doesn't get brought up very often. I don't know why more anti-Catholic polemics don't involve this, but have you ever heard of the Cadaver Synod?
No. Is there a dead pope
So
presiding?
So the Cadaver Synod is a pope for what's his name? Pope Formosus. Okay, he dies, gets superseded by a pope, who then gets superseded by another pope almost immediately. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pope coming after him, Pope Stephen VI, digs up his body to put him on trial. So
I
they
have
quite
heard this.
literally they quite literally put Pope Formosus on trial, dead, 9 months, by the way. They put him in his full getup, his full garb, put him on the witness stand, and the new Pope, Stephen VI, uh, basically accuses him of perjury, of lying, of doing illegal acts as Pope. And then through this trial, this corpse on the witness stand, they null his papacy.
Is he the one pope that has like his name crossed out from like the marble like stone where you've got the list of
It's gotta be because
the,
they basically remove his entire papal reign,
yeah. It's like
which
expunged
is
from the book of names of
it's
popes. Yeah.
it's so weird. It's just one of those weird stories, middle age corruptions. This was in like the 890s. It's just strange. It's weird. It's political. I mean, you had popes murdered at this time. It's just weird stuff going on in the Vatican. And this was
Yeah.
while it was still this was pre-schism, right?
Right.
Pre
Yeah.
1054, you have this stuff going on.
Yeah. Fun stuff. All
And
right,
that's
let's see
before
what
we get to
let's-
popes
let's-
that are selected by the Holy Roman Emperor,
right.
right? Where they're basically selected by German kings.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Which was perhaps part of the problem. Yeah, there are several issues where you get like there's another time where you get a pope who is not like is basically just completely controlled by he's just a puppet for the ruler at the time, and then he another pope, because he is invalid, and he's actually been elected to replace the true pope, and so now you've got two popes reigning, but and so this one who
One's in
was basically brought
Florence,
into
I want to
replace.
say, and then the other one's in Rome. Yeah, one was in France for a while, wasn't he?
Well, there's the Avignon. That's a separate thing, and that's getting to like the Great Papal Schism, where you've got the three popes and stuff. This is actually long before that, and I do forget the name of this pope. But basically, what you have is you have two popes. Everyone in Catholicism acknowledges that one of them was illegitimate, and the other one was legit. But basically, the legit one is then thrown in prison by the powers that be, and the fake one is now ruling. But then the real one dies in prison, and so then the fake one becomes the real pope. Is how Catholics will kind of explain this whole scenario. They're like, well, he was illegitimate at this time, kind of the Catholic legalese, like he was illegitimate here, but then as soon as the fake pope died, because he was duly elected by the conclave, even though it was under duress, it was invalid while there was still a living valid pope. But as soon as that pope died, then this one became valid. And it's all very very technical, and I don't know, it just doesn't seem quite
Something
as
doesn't
spirit
sit
led
right.
as you might expect with an infallible institution. But
Yeah, magisterially infallible, by the way.
right.
Let's just go with that. Let's just stay with that one for a moment. Are all of the dogmas of the Catholic faith apostolic in origin?
Yes.
Okay. Can you provide me with a specific quote from the apostles or anyone in the first 500 years of the church unambiguously teaching the substance of the Catholic dogma that Mary was assumed into heaven in bodily form?
You mentioned Revelation 12 before, and there are early Christians who look to that as evidence of Mary's bodily assumption.
But that's not what I asked. I said, is there anyone who unambiguously teaches the substance?
I don't know. And so I'm trying to answer the question as I understand it. If you're asking, like, where's the word Trinity in the Bible kind of question, then you're right. Like, you can always do that. But that's not how we do theology. So I think that maybe just kind of talking past one another.
Okay, so can you...
I mean, sure, but that's quite a leap to go from Trinity, which is, there on every page, basically. Not quite. That's a bit of an exaggeration. Right. But, it's like you get, there's a lot of references to Trinity to one reference in Revelation, maybe.
So another thing that is awkward for this, and I'm very cautious on this because it's something that I don't personally want to be wrong about, because I would hate to be wrong about something so serious. But the initial reports of the Marian dogmas come from Gnostic sects in like the 6th century, 6th or 7th century. That's how late they come. And those are the first references to bodily assumption, perpetual virginity, and a few of these other things. And they're the first, but they're also not good. So they also say all sorts of other lurid things about Mary that you would not accept as doctrine or as dogma, and absolutely heretical. So they're not particularly kind to Mary, but they seem to be the earliest sources about her bodily assumption and the other Marian dogmas. So it's weird.
Yeah.
And so it's not like even Epiphanius in the 4th century has no idea where Mary is buried. That was his writings on it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, nobody knows. We don't know." And so it seems to be like implying that they don't know, right? So bodily assumption doesn't seem to, because a lot of the times Catholics will argue from argument from silence. So nobody thought that they needed to say it because it was just so widely assumed. Right. Which is the same argument that you get for a few other things, and it just doesn't seem to hold a lot of water.
Yeah.
So it's like I can buy the bodily assumption of Mary as a logical thing that Christ would do for his mother, for the Theotokos, as an honorific thing. But even the Orthodox don't hold to a bodily assumption of Mary. They believe that she did pass through death and then get assumed directly into heaven as the dormitorium of Mary. So I don't think either one is blasphemous or like denigrating to Mary in any way. So yeah.
There you go. Let's see. All right, let's jump ahead. Oh, actually, this is pretty interesting. We can keep going with this.
Provide me with a specific quote from someone in the first 300 years of Christianity explicitly teaching the substance of the Vatican I dogma of papal infallibility.
It is necessary for every church to agree with this church on account of its preeminent authority. If
And you're going to go with that. That proves the papacy. That is an explicit teaching of the substance of the Vatican. I wanted to follow up with that question.
Yeah,
I just want to clarify that you're saying that statement explicitly teaches the substance of the Vatican I dogma of papal infallibility.
Logically, yes. If you say it is a matter of necessity that every Christian agrees with the Church of Rome, and the Church of Rome teaches that the Pope's infallible, then it is, major premise, minor premise, draw a conclusion.
So, why do you disagree with Robert Eno, the professor of church history at Catholic University of America? Hold on one moment. When he says the context, okay, well then let's go to another one. Let's go to William Ledoux, another Catholic scholar. In his book, The Chair of St. Peter, he says, for Irenaeus, it is those churches of apostolic origin that have a greater claim to authentic teaching and doctrine. Okay. Among those, Rome, with its 2 apostolic founders, certainly holds an important place. However, all of the apostolic churches enjoy what he terms preeminent authority in doctrinal matters. Why is he wrong?
Well, he's not wrong in the fact that all of the apostolic churches have an authority in matters of doctrine. But the church that he singles out, the most glorious Church of Rome, is for a reason. He gives that reason. He says on account of its preeminent authority. He doesn't say every church has the same preeminent authority. So the category he's given, he said we could trace the lineage of all of the apostolic churches. So apostolic church is important. And then within that list, within that genus, he singles one out, Rome, and says the reason he singles it out is on account of its preeminent authority. So he's saying there's a specific difference within this genus. Among the apostolic churches, this one is...
So why does Irenaeus say the following? He says, it would be very tedious in such a volume as this to reckon up the successions of all the churches. We do indicate that tradition derived from the apostles organized at Rome. So he is saying that he's essentially doing this for brevity's sake in his own words. And I encourage, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, no. I would agree with that. Like, he's telling you, we had the record, and the Church Leader mentions this in about the year 200 as well, that every church founded by the apostles could list every bishop they had. And obviously, if you've ever read Against Heresies, the book has lengthy, very boring passages.
But are you claiming that, because I don't doubt that local jurisdictions...
You said you were reading that right now, right?
Yes, I'm working through it. It is a slog. It is a slog to get through. But it's also very funny at times because Irenaeus also, he uses like what I would consider to be, I guess, inappropriate language at the time. Like, so he's making fun of Valentinius worshiping a hermaphrodite god, basically, because it's neither man nor woman, right? And so he's using like kind of this like flowery language in his rebuttals against him. So it is, there's like entertaining passages where it's very story-like, but some of it's just so weird because these guys are like nuts. And it always turns into some degenerate sex cult. Like that's what all the heresies end up being. It's like we don't have any sex, or to destroy our desire for sexual pleasure, we just be as degenerate as possible to become numb to it. It's just, it always turns into the same thing. Which, I mean, Mormonism, sex with a lot of women, virgin, whatever.
Mormonism, Anabaptism, you see the same kind of thing, right? Munster, Thomas Munster in the city of Munster, and you get the same kind of thing. You get this abolition of marriage and kind of free love. I mean, you see a bunch of these different heretical sects cropping up. Pretty much anytime there's a shakeup in the church, you'll see these crop up. And what can you say? It's a driving force.
To Joe's point, so even the Orthodox Church believe that Rome does have special maybe privileges is the wrong word, but it does have a dual apostolic origin. It's special in its purpose, but they still believe that Rome, even with that special origin, with those like special honorific titles and whatnot, it didn't have supreme authority and still split away from the rest of the church, right? So Joe's correct that yes, it does have not necessarily preeminence, but it has like a special role. It has a special title. It has dual apostolic origin. So it is special in that way, but not universal in its teachings, right? Because it just obviously did not have universal jurisdiction in the first millennium. It just did not have that.
Right. And even Joe's major premise, minor premise, I don't think flow necessarily, because I think his second premise was that, Rome taught its own, ultimate authority, and it doesn't seem to have taught that for a very long time. I mean, even that self-awareness seems to have come about much, much later. So I think you're right.
Well,
One can claim first amongst equals and still not get there?
Because appeals were made both ways, right? Western churches would make appeals to Eastern fathers. Eastern fathers would make appeals to Western fathers. Basically, it was an appellate system, right? So you have all of these church fathers. If you don't get the ruling that you want here, well, congratulations. You can go somewhere else if you want to, and you can have the bishops fight it out, right?
Right.
And you
Well,
you can call together an ecumenical council, right? And then all the churches submit to the ecumenical council.
The church conquered Rome, right? The Roman Empire lasted far beyond the fall of Rome to the barbarians, and far beyond the fall of Constantinople, in the form of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church essentially took over the institutional role of the Roman Empire in terms of basically being the clerical and administrative power across all of Europe. And that is so basically the church co-opted and modeled its own authoritative structure off of the Roman structure, the Roman hierarchy. And even the Roman law is the basis for canon law in the Catholic Church. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is it makes sense that you would have certain appellate structures and certain assumptions in terms of who's in charge for this earthly institution. It was an earthly institution that did have certain expectations and certain claims to central authority. The question is, were those instituted by Christ? And that still has very scanty textual biblical evidence. You're going to find that much more in the tradition and sort of the self-applied understanding of those texts that develops much, much later, or at least is explicitly expounded much, much later. And so one can agree that there was an earthly, centralized, authoritative church institution that was modeled after the Roman Empire, that lived there, that started soon after Christ ascended, and still deny that institution was the kingdom of God that Christ was establishing. It makes sense that there would be a form of earthly government, but they didn't seem to make the claims that were later made by the church at the time. And so simply the existence of a centralized authority does not prove the type of universal, infallible authority that was claimed far later. So I don't know, just a clear understanding of history certainly precludes a necessary, step-by-step logical syllogistic movement towards the claims of the Catholic Church. It's very easy to evade that logic. Now, you can see that as being the most likely explanation of events. I don't, but it is one possible explanation. But it certainly is not a necessary explanation.
You say that the Roman Catholic Church is basically a continuation of Rome, or vice versa, right? Whereas it still is, even today, very geographically like bifurcated, right? So the Eastern Empire, which is going to be in all of your Balkans, Eastern Europe, that sort of thing, very Orthodox. The Catholic, very Western European, right? And then Protestantism, well, now it's mostly African, but New World type of thing, right? So you can see the further they spread away geographically for the center, it's like that's where the belief structure and the even the legal structure like works, right? So you have the very, very different Eastern, Western, and then I don't know what you would call America, like neo-Western, new Western, so like a Enlightenment, I guess, right?
Yeah, right. I don't know what you call it. I like this. Scooney says, "Hey, I think James is a Protestant." Well, in the words of a movie that you should be watching very soon, welcome to the party, pal. Best Christmas movie ever. John, where do you stand on the
Jingle All the Way?
Yeah, right, exactly. With Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? It is.
That's what I was going to ask.
It is absolutely a Christmas movie. So I mean, it's centered
brother.
around a Christmas party. The man's trying to reconnect with his lost family.
Yeah.
He has to overcome the Grinch, who's trying to steal people's money. That being Alan Rickman, of course. So I mean, yeah, it's a very Christmas movie. It's centered around Christmas, around family, around sacrifice. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I mean, in order to argue that it's not a Christmas movie, I think you have to create some very specific criteria for what makes a Christmas movie. Yeah, it's very hard to do. I mean, I understand that simply having Christmas
it can't be a Christmas movie. It has action in it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Now do what was it? Not what was that movie about killing Santa? I think that was one of the alternate titles, actually.
Santa's Sleigh.
It was a great movie with some fun 3-gun action. It has the guy from Justified. Chad, help me out.
I don't even know if I've seen that.
Fat Man. Yeah.
Batman.
I liked it. It was good. I mean, not great, but it was fun. It's a fun watch. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend it this Christmas season. It's another fun.
Do you see
movie.
the chat? Oh, okay. Sorry. No, you're pulling it up in StreamYard's chat. That is not in the YouTube chat. So YouTube chat censored.
They censored because that's so funny.
Fat Man is too.
They thought it was an insult.
Funny.
That's very funny. Yeah, no, it's fun. It's got, like I said, it's got some fun kind of John Wick style 3-gun gunplay, which is entertaining. And that, so again, in order to claim that Die Hard is not a Christmas movie, would be like claiming that movie is not a Christmas movie, even though it has, a Santa Claus character, just because it has action. I understand that merely the presence of Christmas in a story does not necessarily make it a Christmas story, right? Like all of the Harry Potters have a Christmas at some point, but when the whole story is centered around a Christmas party and Christmas time, it's got Christmas music, like that's a Christmas movie. It is more than just a passing mention.
It's a central theme. It's the reason for the film. It's not a scene in a Harry Potter movie. It's not a chapter in a Harry Potter book. It's the central theme of the movie. It's the reason for the movie, right?
Exactly. And yes, best Christmas movie ever. All right. Well, continuing on.
Jurisdiction was given to these bishops by apostles. I don't deny that. I'm asking though, where is the evidence that universal jurisdiction was given from the apostles, not just local jurisdiction?
I don't think the question of universal jurisdiction is what we need to prove in a debate about the great apostasy.
Well, I'm sorry.
You could be wrong about universal jurisdiction from a Catholic perspective and still say the church on earth existed. In fact, the whole question of what the nature of the Pope's immediate jurisdiction is a question that's really way more nuanced. Because, for instance,
did you say something?
Well, yeah, because he said, you can take away universal jurisdiction in the early church and still have a church on earth. And it's like, well, yeah, but at that point, you just agree with the Orthodox position at that point, or even the Protestant position at that point.
Right.
Because, if you don't have universal authority, then I don't need to be a Catholic. I don't need the Pope if I don't need universal jurisdiction, right? If universal jurisdiction is an accretion, if it's made up, if it's not apostolic, right, then I don't need it.
Right.
We let patriarchs choose their...
But wouldn't that mean that there was institutionally something was lost if we didn't have the papacy?
I'm not saying the papacy is lost.
I'm not saying that either. I'm asking, if the papacy didn't exist, that would mean that the fullness of the church was lost, and something would need to be restored because the apostolic office would be gone, correct?
So in this hypothetical, just to clarify, are you asking if just the Pope is gone?
All right, these get kind of silly. I'm done with the hypotheticals. I wanna watch. Since we don't have tons of time, we've been going for about 2 hours here. I want to see their recap and kind of get a sense for what they're saying. Because even if we have time, we could even jump to Jacob did his own recap after their video, so he's responding to their response
of the recap. Yeah.
So I kind of want to just get a flavor for those videos because I haven't seen either of them yet. So
okay, well, just
right,
before we move on to this,
welcome.
I did not get a very strong defense of the Catholic Church in the first millennium. I feel like I missed that. Because I feel like the modern Catholic, the modern pop apologist, non-tradcat. Okay, so not slandering into my tradcats out there, but the modern pop apologist is going to agree with the modern popes in the Chieti document and say that, and say that, we had a special place in the first millennium, maybe not universal jurisdiction, but we do now. So there you go. I guess.
Welcome to the debate review of the Great Apostasy debate. I've got Joe Heschmeyer here. We are now on opposite ends of the globe. I don't
know what your understanding of the globe is.
Yeah, it's late, dude. I also got sick from the I don't know, just traveling and stuff. So like I felt it like the first night or like the
Christian sick. I feel like I'm coming down with something. There's definitely something going around. So stay safe out there, guys.
It's the holiday season. Everybody needs to get a little sick, dude.
Hey, well, I'm just hoping that, I'll kind of get an immune system boost coming out of this sickness, so I'll be ready for SHOT Show and not get sick like I do every single year.
You just reminded me of that. I've got 3 weeks till SHOT Show, dude. 3.5
See, it's the worst because during SHOT Show, I end up staying up late. I go out with folks and smoke cigars and drink whiskey and, very unhealthy things. And none of this is good for my immune system. And so... and it gets less and less pleasant as the week goes on. So like by Thursday, I'm still,
oh gosh,
Friday
out. Is miserable. If people stick around for Friday, it's a dead show. Nobody's on the floor. Half the employees are gone. People are tearing down.
Friday is fun though if you have products to trade. Like a lot of the companies that have stands will basically just a couple guys will wander around and they'll just kind of talk with other people, and because it's so slow from a media perspective, it's just sort of a special industry day, and so people will just start trading their gear, and like no one wants to take stuff home because they gotta ship it all back, and so they're trying to like lighten their load and give out stuff that they have at their tables, and so it's kind of a fun internal
some cash. I'll wander by the ZCO booth. It's like, I'll give you $200 for the 2 to 10.
Exactly.
Got 200 in my pocket right now.
No, not a bad idea. Just don't tell anyone that there could be some
they might
SHOT Show violations. But Friday can be entertaining, and even there's some good media to be had there because it is much slower in terms of media. But in terms of the SHOT Show flu, it is miserable.
Christmas is about children getting sick. SHOT Show is about degenerates. That's what happened.
Sick.
Yeah,
and sharing their sicknesses with each other.
The night that we were leaving, I was like, oh no, and
I'm
so
sorry
I
to
think
hear
I got
that.
some sort of like cold or something. Yeah.
Jeez, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, it just started. We have a few things that we want to do in the debate review. The first thing that I want to do is play a video for you guys that we recorded right after the debate. We went back to the hotel, which was in walking distance with the church, and we recorded just Joe's immediate afterthoughts of the debate. And then we're going to watch that video. It's only a minute long. And then after that, we're going to get Joe's thoughts and see if they've developed any since he initially gave his first opinion. So let's go ahead and play that video, and then we'll get Joe's thoughts. It'll play in just a second. So Joe, we just finished the debate on the Great Apostasy with Jacob. What are your immediate thoughts?
Number one, I like Jacob. He's a good guy, and he's a formidable debater. I am nevertheless, this is number two, I'm frustrated stylistically, thematically, just as a debater, with the fact that we'd agreed to one resolution on the Great Apostasy, and a good portion of it was him going after what he acknowledged were distinctly Catholic doctrines like the papacy. He talks about a little bit of icon veneration, the Assumption of Mary. And the thing is, even if he was right about all of those, that wouldn't prove that there was a great apostasy, because that would still leave the Orthodox and Coptic claims unchallenged. But also, I mean, just more importantly, from a preparation perspective, if you want to have like almost your entire opening speech be about the papacy, then you should say, like, let's do a debate about the papacy. And I'd be happy,
I see what you're saying there. Like that.
Yeah.
What he admitted earlier is that it would prove from a Catholic perspective that there was an apostasy, but if it proved that, then obviously the Catholics would be wrong. Therefore, you could still default to the Coptics or the Orthodox. Therefore, there would not be a great apostasy.
And even let's take like the most charitable Catholic opinion as well. It would only prove that the modern Catholics have a wrong interpretation of the early church. Catholics from the first millennium may not have had a interpretation of Vatican I, Nostra Aetate, Unum Sanctum and Dictates Papes and a few of these other major documents that really are modern. Right. So the first millennium Catholics would not have any idea of that.
Yeah. Very fair. Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Because, I never bought into this idea that Jacob was being fair at all in the way that he was going about it. It seemed to me like this was totally a red herring. But I was just a little bit surprised at what it seemed like Joe was going along with that line of argumentation. But I understand what he's saying now. That makes a little bit more sense.
In the book on the papacy, there's all sorts of stuff. So I think there was good stuff exchanged, and I think that he has some interesting questions. I hope it was very clear that the heavy weight of Scripture points in the opposite direction of a great apostasy, that the early Christian evidence disproved the great apostasy, and that even if you come away not being convinced that the papacy is true, I hope you're at least convinced that the great apostasy is false, and that's what I set out to do today.
Yes. So those were your immediate thoughts. How have your thoughts on the debate developed since then? Are they roughly the same?
I would say they've developed parabolically. In the couple days after the debate, prior to this evening, I was thinking, post-debate, I'm always like, oh, how should I have done this? I came in with, days and weeks worth of research on the history of Mormon claims about the great apostasy and the particular reasons that the actual LDS Church cites. If you go and look up universal jurisdiction on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints website, you will not find it at all. He is trying an argument that is not his own church's argument for why there was a great apostasy. Now, they talk vaguely about doctrinal corruption. They talk about the removal of the keys. They talk about the loss of the priesthood. They don't say, well, Peter didn't give enough authority to Linus, and therefore there was a great apostasy. Now, there were several other things that were really frustrating about that. I'm sure we can talk about that in a moment. But I certainly prepared for one debate and then came into another one. And sometimes,
Right. So Joe should have just, I'm sure this is what he's going to say, but Joe should have called him out from the get-go and said, if this is what you are defining as the criteria for a great apostasy, then we are not aligned. That in and of itself is not what I mean by a great apostasy, because you could just default to the Orthodox or the Coptics or even the Protestant view much later, and you still have not arrived at a great apostasy.
Yeah, it's a false claim by the Mormon, because even if you again can prove that modern Catholics are improperly interpreting the first millennium, that doesn't disprove the first millennium, just that modern Catholics are misinterpreting it, right? Yeah. Which is the Catholic Protestant argument, or the Orthodox Protestant argument anyways, right?
Right.
So, and also it's when they say, oh, well, they got the keys taken away and there were all these other sort of doctrinal issues and things like that. From my perspective, what I would ask the Mormon is well, what's your source on any of this? And it's oh yeah, 1832 Joseph Smith. No, because they don't have any church fathers. They don't have any early sources that they can cite that support their position. There literally only comes about in the 1800s.
Right.
That's just your own fault for not preparing. But in this case, when he reached out to us, he said he wanted to explore the Mormon claims about the great apostasy. So that's exactly what I researched. What is it Mormons claim happened with the great apostasy? He's a Mormon, I'm not. And so as a non-Mormon, let me make an argument for why I don't believe these claims. That's what I thought was happening. It was not framed as, let's have a referendum on the Catholic Church. And so when he opens his debate by, his opening statement by saying, it is my burden as the negative to prove to you an unbroken apostolic lineage with Peter and his successors having universal jurisdiction, that is absurdly not what we were there to do. That is not what we agreed to. That is not what he said we were going to do. These are not the sides of the debate. So I think people who don't know debates may not understand this, but I think probably people watching the post-debate review do. The affirmative has the burden of proof to show that the resolution is true. They have a lot of latitude in doing that, but you can't just say, so let me give you an example. If you were an atheist, you couldn't say God doesn't exist because I don't think Genesis is literal. I mean, you could do that. Plenty of atheists do that, but that logically doesn't make any sense. At best, you've disproved one understanding of one God. That doesn't prove that there are no gods. So at best, Jacob, if he succeeds on all of his points, proves that one understanding of the Catholic history of the papacy is wrong. That's it. That doesn't prove there are no, all the creeds are abominations, any of the things that Joseph Smith actually claims. It doesn't prove that all of the churches are false, that there are no churches built on the New Testament. Like, that's what Joseph Smith is actually claiming.
So, yeah, because the Mormon holds the position that the church became the whore of Babylon, right? That's in their official doctrines and covenants. That's in their dogmatic book. But they believe that it still did all these great things and was still used by God in the interim, to discover the new world. Like he says, Catholic Christopher Columbus and all these other things were done that were great. It was the whore of Babylon. It also gave us our 66 book canon, which we believe is infallible, but was, the Church of Satan, which is like, it's weird, right? Because if the Pope, pulled from the Church of Satan and was like, oh, we got this great document here from these guys, we're going to copy and paste this into our dogma, we would be like, you got to stop right there. That's, sure, that's a genetic fallacy or whatnot, but I feel like this is just wrong. Okay, we can't do this. But that's what the Mormons have done essentially, right? Is they've taken from the whore of Babylon, all like picked out the good parts, I guess, and then thrown away the rest. And if again you call it apostates, according to them, these people are in outer darkness, right? So that's, I feel like he has like there's more polemics I would do against the Mormon themselves than just the papacy. Which again, I get it from the Mormon's perspective. You want to keep the fight away from Mormon
away from Mormonism
as much as possible. Yeah. Listen, if I'm a Mormon, I'm going to debate you. I'm going to throw up everything possible. Like I'm going to go after Martin Luther. He had a real fancy for whores or something. I'm going to make something up. Okay. All right. Yeah. That's what I'm going to be talking about the whole time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you water down the Mormon claims to something that like isn't even what your own church says, you've kind of kept the shell, but you've changed all the substance in it. So I think that's a kind of egregious burden shift. Like if I was a Mormon and I saw someone trying to defend the Mormon claim by just evacuating the bowels of the actual claim and replacing it with fluff, I think I would find that to be not what I would want. If somebody tried to defend the Catholic claim of whatever, and they just completely redefined what it meant, where it contradicted what the church said it meant, I wouldn't love that. And certainly as a debater going against that, when it's like, why did you ask me to debate this if you didn't want to debate what your church actually teaches on this? But then also, you kind of have to know, as the affirmative, you carry the burden of proof. You can't give a speech outlining how it's my job to prove as a negative the history of icon veneration, Marian doctrines, and everything else. Leave aside that those are different debates. It's also just obviously not something that I'm going to be ready to do, nor something that the time strictures would allow. So those were kind of absurd burdens. So I was very frustrated about that as I kind of ruminated on that in like the 2 days after. But then when we just had a debate watch party with some of my friends, and I felt much better because two things. One, when I found out right after the debate that my audio hadn't recorded at all, that was crushing. To be like,
we should talk about that.
Yeah. So, Jacob,
we'll finish your thoughts and then we'll talk about it.
Okay. Yeah. We'll talk about that. I don't want this to come off as some sort of like knock against Jacob. It's not. And I'll get into all of that. But the argument was you're kind of going through your mind in the 2 days afterwards thinking, oh, when he went in this way that was not what we agreed to, should I have just said, like, I'm not going to talk about the papacy? Should I have scrapped everything about the apostasy and just tried to wing a papacy debate? I wrote a book about the papacy like 5 years ago. I can kind of remember a lot of the sources, but obviously I don't have any of that in front of me because that's not what we agreed to debate. And that's not the side of the resolution I'm on. Like, I purposely wrote a negative opening statement that I think virtually any Protestant or any Orthodox Christian could agree to, because our rejection of this resolution is something that unites all Christians. And so trying to instead say it's my job to prove Orthodoxy and Protestantism wrong in a Mormon debate is just not how debates work. I mean, it just is not how debate work. So I was frustrated about it, and I was worried that in light of all this,
interesting question for us. An interesting question for us, James, is so the Reformation happens 16th century, roughly, right? At what point do you think you personally, if you were born pre-Reformation, do you think you would say that the Catholic Church fell into error to such a point where a Reformation was needed? If the Mormon position is right away.
So, phrase the question again. You said if I was born pre-Reformation, but lived during the time of the Reformation?
No. So with your knowledge now, right? I'm going to say, what's the latest you would say that the Catholic Church was in a position to where it would not need a Reformation? If that makes sense.
I think it has to come down to. I think it has to come down to authority, and so I think really, uh, maybe as late as Vatican I, although really probably I just would stop at the Reformation when it actually did happen, because that is when uh, the historical events of the Reformation are Protestants being kicked out of the what had up to that point been considered that they considered the Church Universal over unsettled matters of doctrine. Right? They were arguing and articulating points of view over things like justification that were not infallibly declared to be incorrect. Or there was not an official infallible line yet, and they were kicked out, not over those issues, but over their unwillingness to submit to the Pope over Scripture and their conscience and understanding of Scripture. And so that is when you start to, the Reformation is an issue of authority. That's what it all boils down to. And so I think it's when that authority really, when the rubber meets the road, when that authority is utilized when it is enforced, essentially, is when the Reformation is required. And so had they never made those claims, had they been willing to continue to work it out and come to a resolution with Luther on, justification, then it wouldn't, even beyond that point, with the corruptions and whatnot, there probably wouldn't have been a need for reformation.
Mm-hmm. Well, so that's the thing. The authority, to me, is not the problem, right? Because if they had come to an agreement or some sort of other understanding, like submitting to a valid authority is not a problem. Right now, obviously, there's the whole American spirit where you want to be rebellious, don't submit to any authority or whatnot. But that's not really
Right.
Christ-like, and that's not really the way that we should think about our lives as a Christian. So, for me, because as somebody who's been looking into everything Catholic, Orthodox, and all that sort of fun stuff, it's like having an authority makes a lot of sense and can really help you as an individual. But you would say so, like first millennium, there would be no problem with submitting to the authority of the church.
Yeah, so to me, it's the
By
the
and large,
claim.
obviously, there's different scandals and whatnot.
Understood. To me, it's the claim of infallibility combined with the evidential or empirical, inductive. These are all just synonyms. Evidence for fallibility. So the claim to infallibility combined with the experiential evidence to the contrary is what necessitated the Reformation. And so had the Catholic Church simply claimed to be the church established by Christ with certain authorities that were very, very strong authorities, but not infallible, meaning they could be wrong, but were the most legitimate authority on earth, that if that was all they said, then even I guess had they kicked out Luther to some degree, then I could see myself, still submitting to that authority and just disagreeing with him on certain issues. But it's when the church that seems evidentially to be flawed and fallible claims infallibility in certain issues that do not seem to be merited on the basis of Scripture, that it starts to build this. You lose faith in the institution, right? And
there's cognitive dissonance, right? You can't tell me that you're infallible while my local cardinal is selling indulgences or you can.
That's not so much the issue. It's not just the corruption. The corruption was just one thing that sort of gives credence to this idea of it being fallible, but it's also the doctrinal issues where it's like you're looking at Scripture and saying this doesn't seem to be right and this seems to be unjustified. And the more and more people learned and investigated the history and looked into the various forgeries and just could further investigate in a more academic and careful look into the history and understand it, the more and more suspect many of the claims became. And so you get this body of evidence that seems to say maybe they're claiming too much. And if they were just claiming to be a very, very strong authority, even that wouldn't break it. But when they claim this infallibility in the style of Vatican I, and even claims that were made, before Vatican I, leading up to it, that were very similar. Vatican I was just the culmination, the final stamp on it. Then that's when you get all these issues. And again, it simply makes you lose faith in the institution, because for Catholics, believing in the infallible authority of the Catholic Church, as well as the Pope, but certainly the Catholic Church and the magisterium in general, that is the first principle. And first principles can only be defeated by faith. You can either have faith in them or you don't have faith in them. And the only way to have that faith or not have that faith is through an evidential inspection. And so that is the first principle. And Protestants lost faith in that first principle. And I think that the claim to infallibility, that final claim to infallibility, is the claim that just goes too far and makes someone say, I'm out, because you've claimed too much.
Right.
And this seems to be clearly wrong. And that makes you question everything else, right? Like, even if you're willing to accept the very strong authority, but not the infallible authority, once they claim infallible authority, that actually makes you now question even the strong authority, because now all of a sudden, that they're fallible and they've claimed to be infallible. Then you say, wait a second, that seems like a lie. So what else are you lying to me about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so that's kind of the problem there, is even if they did not have like a quote unquote infallible magisterium, or they claim to not have an infallible magisterium, that leaves the door open to still leaves the door open to chaos. Because if you say, okay, well, we're a really strong authority, but we're not infallible, and it's like, well, is that statement, so that leaves your whole authority in question, right? Because if you are fallible, then, well, is that statement fallible, or is the next statement fallible? I'm not really sure anymore. So do I have to submit to your authority or not at this point? Right. So, I mean, I'm just curious about that sort of thing.
But
right?
a father has valid authority over his child to a point, right? And even though a father can should ask forgiveness for his son, right, showing that he is fallible, but he still has a certain, has a right to claim authority over his son. And in a similar way, a son should submit to his father, even though he knows that he is flawed. If the father claimed, no, I'm actually infallible, even if it's just in this one thing that I'm telling you to do, I am saying infallibly do this, and the son says, wait a second here, that seems to contradict, Scripture, or just the broader knowledge of God and my understanding of Scripture, and you're claiming that this is an infallible command, then all of a sudden you lose faith in potentially all of the legitimacy of this authority, and that's something analogous to what's going on here. So where you have what would otherwise be a valid authority, and I'm not even. It's like there's a point at which, I think all Christians did believe it was a valid authority. Now, of course, then you get the Great Schism, and now you get some splitting. But there was that claim was not too much. It was not so incredible. But it's then the claim to infallibility that just pushes it over the edge.
Hmm. Well, and I suppose specifically the type of infallibility, because the Orthodox Church believes that, the ecumenical councils are infallible, the canons of the councils are infallible, right? But the individual leaders themselves are not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a totally different question within the Orthodox dilemma.
Yeah, it's an easier claim to defend. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It gives a lot more loopholes and a lot more ability to kind of allow for issues. It makes them.
Well, it's a much more defensible position, right? Because you don't have to defend a single man.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's not susceptible to the kind of evidential attacks or suspicions that the Catholic Church was susceptible to. Which is why I think you don't really see a Protestant break within Eastern Orthodoxy. It doesn't really make sense. There's no need for it. Whereas within Catholicism, you needed it, right?
Yeah, no, makes sense.
So let's jump to Jason's, and then we can get out of here. I just want to see what he says because he is directly responding.
Jacob
yeah, Jacob. Sorry. Yeah, Hanson.
More like Jacob Handsome. Am I right?
Yeah,
that's probably the gayest thing I've
so
said.
Who's gay now?
Yeah, I know. Well, listen, the Catholic guys, like, they got snozzes on them, all right, bro? Like, this is how I know these guys, is this shot right here. So when I see them up and about and, like, walking around, they look totally different to me, and I'm like, oh, all right.
Right.
You never see them anywhere else other than, like, just this perfect straight-on shot.
Right. All right, let's see what we got.
We should do a tier list, most handsome apologetics.
Where is it? Just saw it earlier. Jacob Hansen review. Does he not have a channel? Does he just go on other people's channels?
Thought he was their top guy. Although maybe it's better to not have your own channel so people can't look up all the things that you said easily.
Right. No, I think he does. I saw one earlier, but when I look up Jacob Hansen, all I see are him appearing on other people's.
It's named something else. Is it
Zion
like
Media
Mormon Answers?
Yeah,
Media. Thoughtful Faith? Is that the one?
Okay. I don't know. Jacob Hansen.
Let me see here.
Channel.
Oh yeah, so it is. It is I have it right here. I can send you the link.
Okay.
So it is. It is Thoughtful Faith. So I have the link in the where is it? Link is in the private chat for you. I do not have enough internet.
I found it. I can share. All right, let me stop sharing this video.
His audio came through very clear.
Here we go.
So last week, I did a debate with Joe Heschmeyer on the subject of the Great Apostasy. And frankly, I think it went great.
Great set,
Not only did I have a great experience showing...
What'd you say?
That's a great set, by the way.
Yeah.
I gotta actually
and Cameron
build a
around
streaming
Salt Lake.
set, dude.
Yeah.
Everybody else's
about
stuff
time.
looks so professional. Yeah. Might as well.
City. In the debate, I made points I wanted to make, and I did not feel that Joe was able to deal with them. Since my debate, the response from my fellow Latter-day Saints has been overwhelmingly positive. However, many Catholics, including Joe, have been crying foul.
Jacob brought me to Utah on false pretexts and lied to the audience, both about what we were debating and who had the burden of proof.
Now, obviously, I completely disagree and will explain why. But I actually want to empathize with that for a moment. If you don't understand clearly what Latter-day Saints mean by the Great Apostasy, I can see why my approach may have come out of left field. So that is why I wanted to make this video, to help clarify what Latter-day Saints mean by a great apostasy and why it is so intricately connected to the papacy. After all, if the papal claims are true, then the great apostasy did not happen. So at a very minimum, I must prove the papal claims are not true in order to prove a great apostasy. And to show that there was no great apostasy, Joe would need to point to the continuous existence of an institutional church that perfectly preserved the gospel. And even Joe will admit this.
But otherwise, we'll just leave it like this. If a great apostasy happened, Catholicism is false, right? Because we say great apostasy didn't happen. If a great apostasy didn't happen, Mormonism is false because they say one did happen, and that's why you need Mormonism as a restoration. These are not just, in other words, historical claims that are interesting. These are foundational kind of knockout punches. If either of us is wrong about this, it disproves our entire church. It disproves our entire religion. So we don't have to actually look at 1,000 other issues.
These sort of statements and like this slide is just so pointless to me, because it's like you have to define exactly what you mean by great apostasy. And, maybe in this video he did earlier on, but this statement right here just doesn't tell you much at all. There's just so much left open to interpretation in terms of what great apostasy actually means. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess this kind of lays out the stakes. And maybe if you supplement this with a second slide that clearly defines what you mean by great apostasy, maybe then you're in good shape. But this alone is like such just a fluffy statement. It doesn't really mean much.
I wonder, though, there's no way Jacob could use the same argument. And that's kind of the disingenuous part, is there's no way he could use the same argument against a Protestant or an Orthodox person.
Right.
What is he supposed to say to them?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point.
We might disagree on, or might have maybe nuanced disagreements on.
Joe is exactly right. And there is a famous story shared in our general conference about a Catholic scholar who laid out the same kind of stakes that Joe laid out. The scholar said the following, quote, "You Mormons are all ignoramuses. You don't even know the strength of your own position. It is so strong that there is only one other tenable in the whole Christian world, and that is the position of the Catholic Church. The issue is between Catholicism and Mormonism. If we are right, you are wrong. If you are right, we are wrong. And that's all there is to it. The Protestants, and Orthodox for that matter, haven't a leg to stand on."
That's interesting. I guess just okay, whatever. So they're saying that they need a living set of apostles, and that's the only place that true authority comes from. So they completely discount the bishopric and the patriarchs and any other system outside of basically their own papacy. So they're recreating the papacy with their quote unquote prophet. Right.
"For if we are wrong, they are wrong with us, since they were a part of us and went out from us. If we have the apostolic succession from St. Peter, as we claim, there is no need of Joseph Smith and Mormonism. But if we have not that succession, then such a man as Joseph Smith was necessary."
Yeah,
what are you talking about? You can't possibly have apostolic succession.
Well, no, the "we" here is supposed to be a Catholic, but I'm confused how he introduced this statement. I think he's saying that a Catholic said this, right?
Because they were a part of us, went out from us.
The issue is between Catholic. One other Mormons are all ignoramuses who laid out the same kind of stakes that Joe laid out. The scholar said the following, quote,
or might have maybe nuanced disagreements on.
"Joe is exactly right. And there is a famous story shared in our general conference about a Catholic scholar who laid out the same kind of stakes that Joe laid out. The scholar said the following, quote, "You Mormons are all ignoramuses. You don't even know the strength of your own position. It is so strong that there is only one other tenable in the whole Christian world, and that is the position of the Catholic Church. The issue is between Catholicism."
So this to me seems like a completely made up story, right? This is he's referencing a book by a Mormon who is recounting this quote from a Catholic that seems to perfectly show the Mormon position. So I'm going to call foul on this and say this is completely made up. But as long as we understand that what we're quoting is a Mormon's recounting of a Catholic quote that seems to perfectly say what Mormons would want it to say.
That does seem strange.
Yeah.
And Mormonism. If we are right, you are wrong. If you are right, we are wrong. And that's all there is to it. The Protestants, they were a part of us and went out from us. If we have the apostolic succession from St. Peter, as we claim, there is no need of Joseph.
Can you imagine a Catholic saying that? A Catholic comes along and says, it's us or the Mormons. Like, those are the only two options. No, a Catholic would obviously say something along the lines of, it's either us or the Orthodox. That's what Joe said.
Why would a Catholic say anything to the effect of, if we have apostolic succession? Like, you do have apostolic succession. Right. There's not really a question of that between Catholic or Orthodox in terms of apostolic succession. So, yes, Catholic man, allegedly, there is no need of Joseph Smith.
Smith and Mormonism. But if we have not that succession, then such a man as Joseph Smith was necessary. Again, Joe Heschmeyer has said essentially the same thing.
But, again, I want to point out, they make interesting arguments against Protestantism. He says, it is instructive to observe, however, that the weakness of the Protestant sects as to any claim to divine appointment and authority is recognized by those churches themselves. And he gives the example of the Church of England. It originates in revolt against the Roman Catholic Church and its Pope, and is without foundation of claim to divine authority and priestly orders. In other words, the Church of England does not claim that in Matthew 16, when Jesus founds the church, he was founding the Anglican Church with the king as the head of it. That's not the claim. But the Catholic claim is Jesus founded this church directly in Matthew 16. The Mormon claim is that Joseph Smith, guided by God and by numerous saints and everything else, and angels, refounds the church. The Anglican claim is that an act of parliament creates their church. And Talmage is just like, that's kind of crazy. And I think it's worth chewing on if you're a Protestant.
It's important to remember the great apostasy is a claim by the Church of Jesus.
That seems a little glazy there, because I feel like most Protestants would say that the Holy Spirit guided these people to found these churches in opposition to errors, right? So not just one day they just like said, it'd be really convenient if we didn't have a pope, so let's just write up this nonsense, right? They would say, I would hope that most Protestants would say that, oh no, our churches were found, by the Holy Spirit and trying to follow God's will in opposition to errors that we saw in the other denominations or the other churches or whatnot. We would hope that that's at least what they would say.
Right.
Which
Christ
is
of
what
Latter-day
Mormons would
Saints
say about
about
Joseph Smith, right?
Right.
They say direct divine revelation through the angel Moroni and the secret tablets, right?
Ecclesiastical history of the Christian movement. It posits the ultimate central authority, once held by Peter, which is essential to the institutional church, was lost, and that without that central authority, guided by revelation, to hold things together, there was an institutional schism and doctrinal corruption that happened over and over again through the centuries.
So I guess I didn't realize how much Mormon doctrine also relies upon the same foundation of Catholic doctrine that Christ gave the keys to Peter.
Yep.
However, they always ignore 2 chapters later where Christ then gives the keys to all of the apostles. And in Revelation, when it talks about the cornerstones, there's 12 of them, not one Petrian rock. There's 12. So it seems to follow the same issues. So I guess it is going to end up being a papal debate. Like that's its only option.
Right. Yeah, I didn't realize either how parallel they are.
Now, I had the burden of proof in this debate to show this.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I feel like I just haven't seen Mormons debate. I've only ever seen Mormons debate Protestants or Orthodox, never Catholics directly. So this is probably why. Interesting.
Perhaps, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
History was true.
Call for my wife,
and it is what I
take this call real fast. So I'm gonna.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. We'll let it play.
Demonstrated in the debate. So why all the focus on the papacy? Well, because the papacy is the only institution claiming it has always held the same central and ultimate authority that Peter held. What's funny is that Latter-day Saints actually agree with Catholics that Peter held the ultimate authority in the early church as the chief apostle. Also, we believe, like Catholics, that if you lack a living central authority, that you don't have the fullness of the institutional church. And without that central authority, what will result is schism and doctrinal drift. Think about it. It would be like if the US government lacked a Supreme Court. If all you had were lower courts with equal authority, what would happen? Well, you would get division in the body politic because there would be no one to render ultimate final judgment. So, do Protestants even claim to have a single living central authority with universal jurisdiction that holds Peter's authority? No. Even Joe admits Protestants believe in a great apostasy, but essentially they just won't admit it.
Right. So if Protestantism is true, then you would seemingly need something like a universal apostasy.
Now, do Orthodox claim that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Because so Jacob is explicitly making that argument that that's the Protestant claim. So he's equating the Mormon claim to, or he's equating the Protestant claim to the Mormon claim.
Have a single living central authority with universal jurisdiction that holds Peter's same authority? No. And in the debate.
Oh, I did. So it's interesting.
You cut off
he makes
a split second. You went black.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Jacob is saying that, and Joe makes a similar claim that basically Mormon logic would require a apostasy as well. They're both agreeing that the Protestants claim a great apostasy, which Protestants don't claim ourselves, but I guess it makes sense that Catholics would try to make that argument. I've talked to a Catholic and he tried to run something similar on me. It's the old gates of hell prevailing argument from Catholics against Protestants, where they're saying, well, if your claims are true, then the gates of hell did prevail. I don't know. It's never seemed very convincing to me.
Well, I think Catholics have like a little bit of an argument if Protestants say that, Catholics go to hell, and there is actually a total apostasy.
Yeah.
Because there are a few Protestants that take that position that Catholics basically go to hell. And if you say that, then yeah, the Catholic Church 1000% fell away and they are apostates. Not just incorrect about a few doctrinal issues. They're like actual apostates. Which
Right.
I feel like most Protestants that should be incorrect, and that should be pushed back against. That's
It
not
should.
accurate.
You'll mainly see that in certain modern denominations, but like even traditionally, you will see that in Baptist denominations, especially if they'll try to claim they'll try to claim a succession, and they'll basically try to trace it through the pre-Reformation years, and like look to like the Waldensians and like look to these different sects, and claim that because they were being persecuted by the church and misrepresented by the church, this was the true church. This was the remnant that remained. It's a really hard argument to make, a pretty bad argument to make, because in the end you end up siding with a lot of pretty well-established heretics that you really shouldn't be siding with. I guess if you claim that they were just being misrepresented by by the false church, then maybe you can make it work. But it's a bold claim and really hard to make historically. But yeah, there are certainly kind of anti-historical Christians or anti-canonical Christians that will basically say that if you don't hold to a justification by faith alone principle that your modern day Protestant holds to, and didn't hold to that in the past, then you're going to hell, because Christ plus anything is nothing, is the argument, right? So if you believe that your works are doing anything for you, then you're going to hell, which would necessitate that pretty much all Catholics and all Christians prior to the Reformation and many post-Reformation are going to be in hell.
Yeah.
So
yeah, which
that's a
which
hard
is
one.
awkward, and that's the thing that it's like like 10 billion Catholics, everybody since post Peter to Martin Luther. What the hell? It's like, I don't know about that, man. That's rough, dude. And yeah, that would be a great apostasy position. Essentially, you would have to say that.
I mean, or you could say something like what Reform Renegade is saying, where if you've got just a couple Christians, if that's how you're defining the church as being the individual Christians that are alive, then maybe it's just then you just get to a definition of terms, and that's fine. What is this? Why does James keep going on about sex? I didn't realize that I was.
Because you were talking about sex.
Oh.
You were saying sex. Like SECTS.
SECT.
All the different sexes.
I mean,
sex,
normally
sorry.
I am talking about sex, so you are correct, unintentionally so.
Normally this is correct, but not in this. Not in this
one particular.
Yeah, too many men on screen for James to be talking about sex this stream.
That's right. That's right. No, that happens in the focus strip streams when I drink a little bit more because I don't have to talk theology. so those get a little bit more freewheeling. Yeah.
Well, the topics are a little more fruity sometimes as well, to be fair.
Exactly. All right. Well, we only have a few more minutes on this. We can finish
Joe
it out.
admits that without a pope, you don't have the fullness of the institutional church. Joe, is the Orthodox Church the true church?
I would say no, but I think you could believe.
Well, that's the only question. That's the only question I have. Just yes or no. So to have the fullness of the church, you have to have the ultimate infallible adjudicating authority for the church to have the fullness.
Well, you have to have the pope.
If you didn't have the pope, would you have the fullness of the church?
If you didn't have the papacy, you wouldn't have the fullness of the church.
Yeah. So you wouldn't have. You had said that you don't have the fullness of the church without the papacy, which to me sounds like essentially what Latter-day Saints are claiming when we claim that the fullness of the church was lost, but that there still was a body of believers. So if the Protestants and the Orthodox don't have the fullness of the institutional church, by Joe's own admission, then the only real option left is the Catholic Church. Do you see now why in my debate I was focusing on the papacy? You see, I focused on the papacy because there is only one church that claims Peter's ultimate authority has had a continual existence in history, and that is the Catholic Church, which claims this authority has always existed in the papacy. So I took on the burden of proving that those claims were false. Remember, if the papal claims are true, then that disproves the great apostasy narrative. Do you see why the papacy is so intricately connected to the historical narrative of a great apostasy? Now, a Protestant may look at both of us and say, but what if Peter's central authority is not needed for the fullness of the institutional church? But is a Catholic going to claim that? Keep in mind that Latter-day Saints agree 100% with the Catholic arguments for why a central authority is needed to have the fullness of the church. If I was debating a Protestant or an Orthodox, I would actually use the Catholic arguments, which are quite good, by the way, to show why the church is institutionally incomplete without a single, living, divinely guided central authority. Because that authority exists to prevent doctrinal drift and to maintain institutional unity. Also, I intentionally focused entirely on the historical claims made by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because the apostasy is a claim about history, and it is demonstrable entirely from the history. It is not dependent on Scripture and can be fully demonstrated without an appeal to Scripture. So instead of getting bogged down in the debate in different interpretations of Scripture, I focused on the history, which is crystal clear. If I were an atheist, I could look at the history and see that the great apostasy narrative is true. The history simply shows that the central authority held by Peter did not exist after him, and that what resulted from the loss over time of that authority was exactly what you would predict: institutional schism and doctrinal drift. That simply is what happened in history, and it has to be dealt with. I did not shift the burden of proof. I proved that the apostasy narrative was true because the only reasonable attempt to claim a continuous institution is the one put forth by the papacy, and it fails miserably upon analysis. Anyway, I understand if Joe was caught off guard by this focus on history and the papacy. Ultimately, though, I think that Joe did not have a good understanding of what Latter-day Saints mean by the great apostasy, or why refuting the papacy is so central to me proving that claim. Now, Joe has claimed that I was being dishonest or unethical in this debate.
Jacob brought me to Utah on false pretexts and lied to the audience, both about what we were debating and who had the burden of proof.
But I hope now he and others can see why I made the arguments I made, and that I wasn't trying to shift the burden of proof, but rather I was trying to prove what the actual LDS claims are about the great apostasy, and why the papacy is not an explanation sufficient to disprove those claims.
If a great apostasy happened, Catholicism is false, right? Because we say great apostasy didn't happen. If a great apostasy didn't happen, Mormonism is false. So we don't have to actually look at 1,000 other issues we might disagree on or might have maybe nuanced disagreements on.
Anyway, if you have not seen the debate, I will be releasing it soon on my channel.
All right, John, so final analysis. Team Jacob or Team Joe?
Well, so I'm going to do the take Jacob's here and be like, great arguments against the papacy, but all sense of the great apostasy, though, right? So I get what he's saying from a tactical perspective of shifting the goalposts onto another vector to prove the apostasy, right? Because he couldn't use these arguments against an Orthodox or a Protestant. He would have to then switch. Essentially, he would run around to the other side of the table, start playing the other chessboard, and be like, no. You do need a centralized authority, but not the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is wrong, but you still need one, and that's what proves the great apostasy or something like that. So in the debate, I think that Jacob came off a lot better because he essentially was able to blindside his opponent. I don't know if it looks good if you're a Mormon, I guess, but to everybody else it looks bad. So I don't know if it's a great victory in that sense, right?
It is funny though. It's an interesting tactic. It's almost like he's basically making an internal critique. Like he's saying, you and me, Catholic brother, we agree on all of this, but disagree on this one thing, namely the papacy actually continuing what we all agree was established by Christ in the papal chair, or the authority of the Pope. And so he's basically trying to make an internal critique of Catholicism to validate the Mormon view. I'm not totally sure that's unfair. It is a novel approach, or at least it would seem so. And I think that Joe probably is correct, because I think Mormons can be kind of snaky. I don't I believe Joe when he says that in research this is not the standard attack, and this is not how they will talk about the apostasy. So I do think that in the final analysis it probably wasn't a very fair form of argumentation, but as sort of an intellectual pursuit, perhaps, I could see why Jacob is going this route, because Jacob's very intelligent and Jacob sees this. He's able to kind of do the math and be like, okay, if I cross this, I'll cross that. I mean, just like he did in this video. It's like, all right, this is the area that I need to fight. And so, yeah, it makes sense. Like, I get where Jacob feels
go
justified.
After Catholics using the Catholic paradigm.
Right.
Yeah, so
now Joe could say, well, I could just fall back
critique.
to orthodoxy, but then Joe is giving up Catholicism. And so Jacob is saying, assuming you're a Catholic,
he does not want to do.
Right. Exactly. So it's like Jacob is saying, assuming you're a Catholic,
and also
then
it's funny. It's funny in that sense too, because he's literally in a Catholic church doing it. So there's no way that Joe can just give up the Catholic position to argue as if he was Orthodox or Protestant. So that would be tactically bad, or at least a bad look, right? But yeah, I mean, I don't know what Jacob does against somebody else, right? Because then you would have to and also I feel like it is a little scummy because Mormons do this all the time, where they hide as far away as possible from their own positions, from their own teachings. It's like, so here's this 1968 book by one of your prophets, by the way, your infallible prophets, calling the church the whore of Babylon. So why do you believe in the whore of Babylon's canon or any of these other things, right? It's like, Mormons try to have everything, so they take the Catholic position while saying the Catholic position is false. Like, he at parts in the debate, he talked like an Orthodox person would. Like, you just watched a Jay Dyer video and he was like, perfect, I'm going to use these arguments for my own good. And yeah, I think that's what you have to do, though. And I think tactically it makes sense 100% for him to move the discussion onto the papacy, because I think the papacy at this point in time online is kind of hard to defend.
Yeah.
Like, the arguments are pretty good and they keep getting better. So it's rough from that perspective. But yeah,
but you're right. It does kind of make
it's a polemic. It's not an apologetic.
Yeah, and it makes the Mormons look bad. The more this is the method that they pursue, it does make them look like they're not willing to defend their own positions. So I mean, I know Jacob will talk about
this might be good for him tactically. Like, this is actually good for me, right? From somebody who's Protestant or even Orthodox, because it looks like, the two guys with nonsense positions are tearing each other down.
Right. Like, the two teams with nonsense ecclesiologies are both wrong. What do you know? Yeah.
Well, I would not say that the Catholic Church has nonsense ecclesiology, but in terms of what the papacy has evolved into, right, is what we disagree with.
Well, yeah, I do think that it is fundamentally flawed from the get-go. I mean, I think that's basically what Protestants have to say, is that its understanding of, I mean, all the way back to Augustine. Augustine had a particular understanding of the church that modern day Protestants do not hold to, right? Even though we do hold to his doctrine of grace. And so it's like, some have called the Reformation basically the triumph of Augustine's doctrine of grace over his doctrine of the church. I don't know if that's a fair characterization, but it's there's something to that. And so, it goes back very far. This, in my view, false understanding of the church. And so, even if there was some legitimate authority, the Protestant claim really is that the church, the Catholic Universal Church, right, the one that's referred to in the Nicene Creed, one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, is referring to the invisible church and not an earthly institution. And that, this idea of an earthly institution is a very old idea. And so if you're a Protestant, you are rejecting a very old idea. That's okay. There are other very old ideas you're rejecting as Protestant. Most of the Marian dogmas, and so, but that's a pill you have to swallow. And if you're not comfortable with that, then you should look into it. But that is what we have to do as Protestants. All right. Well, with that,
Fun topic.
I think it was a fun topic, and we managed to squeeze 3 hours out of it. And I think it was informative, and for a rather lame debate, I think it was. I enjoyed this conversation. I thought it was interesting and fruitful, and even just kind of going into some of the theory of how debating can and should be done, and how to do proper apologetics. So hopefully you pick something up. And John, thank you for being here with me. Everyone, we will see you next week. Hopefully next Tuesday. We haven't confirmed the schedule yet. I know with the week between Christmas and New Year's, it's always a little bit up in the air in terms of what families are doing and whatnot. But hopefully we'll have Christian back next week, and we'll try to have at least one show next week, day to be determined, but tentatively Tuesday. God bless everyone.